Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like to declare open the second plenary session of the 7th Conference of States Parties. Delegates, we recall that yesterday we experienced a time overrun in our work, as a result of which we could not go beyond agenda item number 4. The plan has been to move on to agenda item number 5, but we couldn't. And regrettably also, we could not exhaust the published speakers list. Though the agenda item 4 closed yesterday, I will now endeavor to afford the speakers on the closed speakers list for agenda item number 4 an opportunity during the course of the week to deliver their brief interventions when we find time. The affected delegations are as follows. United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, you know. Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Control Arms, MAT for Peace, Development and Human Rights, Honduras, Nigeria, ASER, and Cameroon. Those are the speakers on my list who we didn't have the chance to make their interventions yesterday, and for whom we'll find time in the course of the week to get them to make their points. I will give the affected delegations sufficient notice regarding the time when they can deliver their statements. In advance of that occasion, I request the affected delegations to summarize their statements and have their full statements submitted to the Secretariat for publication on the ATT's website. I think that's very important. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, today we'll focus on 3 agenda items. 5, treaty universalization. Number 6, treaty implementation, and agenda number 7, matters pertaining to the Secretariat. So we move now to agenda number 5, item 5, treaty universalization. With respect to this agenda, we shall commence this section with the ATT Secretariat's brief overview presentation on the status of ATT participation since the treaty came into force in 2014. After the Secretariat's presentation, I will invite my co-chair of the working group on treaty implementation, Ambassador Villegas of Argentina, to join me in presenting to the conference the report of the working group. This will be followed by the delegates' exchange of views on the report and other matters related to treaty universalization. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, at this stage, let me invite the head of the Secretariat to provide overview presentation on the status of ATT participation. Mr. Secretary, please.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. I am grateful to the President and the co-chairs of the working group on treaty universalization for giving the Secretariat an opportunity to provide an overview of the status of ATT participation. We would make this presentation following the usual practice we've established over the years, where we start by providing a global overview of the participation in the ATT, followed by a regional overview. And thereafter we'll look at the distribution of states by region in terms of their participation in the ATT. And we'll conclude by looking at the rate at which states became parties to the ATT. I request my colleagues to put the presentation on screen. My apologies, Mr. President, if I'm for a moment, please. All right, now we have the presentation, and I'll ask my colleagues to move to slide number 1 of the presentation. In terms of general overview, we have 110 state parties at the present moment, as you'll be aware. It's a very good number to have at this point in time, but not a number to be complacent about, because we still need to have the treaty universalized, meaning we need to get much more states than we currently have. But whilst we have 110 state parties, we've got 31 states that have signed the ATT but have not yet joined, not ratified or acceded to the treaty. So they still have an extra step to go. And we also have 51 state that had signed the ATT but had later indicated that they do not intend to become a state party. So there's only 1 state in that category. And the other states who are UN member states who have not yet associated with the ATT are currently 54. So basically meaning that we still have 54 states that are not yet associated with the ATT. And it's important, therefore, as part of universalization efforts to try to reach out to those states and get them on board to become state parties. On the right of the screen is an indication of the pie chart. And the pie chart indicates very clearly, if you look at that against the UN membership, 56% of UN member states are already state parties to the ATT, 110 to be specific. But at the same time, we have 16% of them who are not yet signed the ATT, though who have not yet ratified, though they've signed the ATT. And 54 are remaining outside, which is 28%. We are happy about the pie chart as it looks, but of course there is a lot of effort that we have to apply in getting, probably turning the pie chart to be green, to remove all the other colors, but go for green. Next slide. In terms of distribution of states, I think it's important for us to reflect on that in terms of how states are distributed across all regions. In making this intervention about distribution of states, we're relying on the UN Statistic Division numbers, and there's a reason why we've chosen to do so. But on the left of the presentation, you can see the distribution of states by region. Basically meaning, as an example, there are 22 UN member states from the region Europe, and there are 28 member states of the UN from the region Africa, as an example. And I think that is how the distribution of UN member states are basically spread. But the pie chart or the graph on the right, or the chart on the right, reflects a distribution of state parties by region. Basically saying in each and every region, how many states have become state parties to the ATT. Of course, you will see then some kind of a converse picture here. As an example, on the left, we're indicating that 25% of UN member states are members, are from the Asian region. But however, when you come to the right, you realize that from the Asia region, only 9% of state parties with the ATT are coming from that region. So there is indeed a difference between 22 on the left, 25 on the left, and 9% on the right. But equally, you can see in the European region, now we have on the left an indication that 22% of UN member states are from the region Europe. But if you look to the right, you realize that those make up about 35% of our state parties to the ATT. This basically indicates, it tells us a story. And the story that we get from here is that there are regions where there is still a growth opportunity for the ATT. And I think our universalization efforts will be directed towards that. I think the growth of the ATT in the European region, it has almost reached a very critical point. It's very high. But if you look at the other regions, there's quite a number of opportunities over there. If you can move to the next slide. In terms of regional overview, how do regions look like? What is the picture that you get in the regions? And again, all that you see over here is about how the region are spread in terms of ATT membership. Europe, as indicated, is the region with the most state parties, followed by, of course, the Americas, and followed by Africa. Asia seems to have the least number of states parties. And again, the picture is that we need to get to a point where we try to improve the membership of the ATT in that region, Asia, having the least number of state parties. So that is the picture that we get over here. But again, at the same time, part of the discussion of the treaty universalization discussion is to look at whether, what kind of tactics, what kind of narratives, what kind of strategies can we use to get more parties or states to become state parties to the ATT? And of course, that is a subject of discussion by the working group. But we've realized in the past discussions that targeting and placing a target, for instance, at some point, there was a target of having, in 2018, the target was to have 100 state parties, and that was reached. And all of us were excited about that. But what is the next target? Is it 110? We've reached 110 already in 2020, but what's the next target? Because once we have a target, probably we can begin to put effort behind the target and try to get to it. But those are discussions that the state parties must have and other stakeholders in this meeting. The next slide, please. It's about participation of states. Here we are indicating the rate at which states became state parties to the ATT. And of course, as a way of background, you will recall that the ATT was negotiated within the framework of the UN, and it was adopted then by the General Assembly in April of 2013. And it opened for signature on the 3rd of June, 2013. And if you take that as a starting point in terms of trying to look at the years, we can say, look, from June 2013 to June 2014 is 1 year. And from 2014 to 2015 is a second year and third year. Apply that logic. And you will see that in the first year and the second year, many states became state parties to the ATT in the first three years. Year number 1, year number 2, and year number 3. And in year number 4, you started to see a decline in the number of states becoming state parties. And of course, we are aware that at that time, that is when the heavy lifting of state parties began. In the first 2 years, it was a momentum of the ATT negotiations and all of it. But after that, these are states who are becoming, from year number 4, these are states which are becoming state parties after having bought to the narrative that is being sold by state parties and others from this framework. So it's important as we move forward to realize that these numbers can improve only if there's effort that we put into it. You realize therefore that in year number 4, it's 7 states, in year number 5, 3 states. Year number 6, we've got 6. The following year is 4 and 4. And of course, it can't be 4 all the time. At some point, it has to go up, but it requires effort. The last slide, Mr. President, if I may, is actually the participation rate across the per region. And again, this is just a reflection of how the regions perform in terms of becoming state parties. In Europe, of course, in the first 2 years, they became the most states that became state parties. And there's a reason behind that. I think they have always had in place quite a number of initiatives regionally that had helped them to move towards the ATT. But after that, of course, they've reached almost a plateau. But other regions need to pick up. Africa as one, as well as Latin America and others. So this is a picture, Mr. President, that we see when you look at the status of participation at the present moment. And I would want it to end up here. And of course, therefore, what I sought to do is to create some points of discussion for this meeting in respect of what we can do to improve the picture that we currently see. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. The picture shows that we do have a lot of work to do, and that work should continue and should accelerate. Work has obviously slowed down a little bit, but it will pick up, and hopefully we will get to full membership. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, at this stage, I would like to invite Ambassador Federico Villegas, in his capacity as my co-chair of the working group on treaty universalization, to join me in presenting the reports of the working group to the conference. Ambassador? Thank you, Ambassador Villegas. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. I will begin, I'll present the first part of the report, and I'll yield the floor to my colleague to give the rest of the report. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the draft report to the 7th Conference of States Parties to the Arms Trade Treaty is presented by us co-chairs, myself, and Ambassador Villegas. It is intended to reflect the efforts carried out in support of ATT's universalization and the working group in 2021. The report also proposes recommendations on steps to be taken with respect to ATT's universalization beyond this presidency, beyond CSP7. The preambular section of the treaty emphasizes the desirability of achieving universal adherence to the treaty. Article 17(4)(b) of the treaty provides that the Conference of States Parties shall, and I quote, consider and adopt recommendations regarding the implementation and operation of this treaty, in particular, the promotion of its universality. These provisions of the treaty highlight promotion of treaty universality as a critical element of the treaty deserving the attention of all ATT stakeholders. The working group was established by the 3rd Conference of States Parties to the ATT, CSP3, with the objective of leading the process of harmonizing thoughts and ideas on the issue of treaty universalization with a view to determining the best approaches for taking the issue forward. CSP3 also endorsed the ATT-WGTU co-chairs draft report, including terms of reference for the working group on treaty universalization and the working group on universalization's initial work plan. The 5th Conference of States Parties, which is CSP5, considered the ATT-WGTU co-chairs draft report and decided to adopt the ATT universalization toolkit. And this is in quotes, welcome back for new states parties to the ATT, as well as encourage ATT stakeholders to translate those documents, 2 documents, into languages which will assist in promotion of the understanding of the treaty. It also requested the ATT Secretariat to upload both documents to the ATT website. And it requested the Secretariat to continue to analyze the trends and pace of universalization of the ATT and to report annually to the CSP, which the Secretariat has just done. These are the foundational documents as it pertains to the work and mandate of the WGTU during the period prior to CSP7. Let me now talk about the appointment of the WGTU co-chairs. CSP6 mandated the CSP7 presidency, which is myself, with the responsibility of facilitating the work of the working group until the next annual ordinary section of the conference, CSP6. On 28 October 2020, the CSP7 president appointed Ambassador Federico Villegas of Argentina, who was the CSP6 president, as a co-chair of the WGTU with a view to building upon the work of previous co-chairs of the WGTU. Our mandate, updates on the outreach that we did. As CSP7 president, one of Sierra Leone's priorities has been encouraging states that have not yet joined the treaty to do so at the earliest. In this regard, the CSP7 president facilitated the preparation and processing of the 2020 ATT resolution at the first committee of the United Nations General Assembly, which was voted in favor by 150 states. The resolution specifically called upon all states that have not yet done so to ratify, accept, approve, or accede to the treaty in accordance with their respective constitutional processes in order to achieve its universalization. During this cycle, the WGTU co-chairs' efforts to promote the treaty have been impacted by the COVID-19 health and travel restrictions. That has impacted almost everything, as we all know. But despite this drawback, the 2 co-chairs conducted individual and joint universalization activities by engaging with permanent representatives of states that are not yet ATT states parties in order to ascertain their respective governments' interests and challenges in joining the ATT. Our president, the president of Sierra Leone, His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada Bio, wrote to heads of states whose countries have not yet become ATT state parties, encouraging them to join the treaty. We adopted a strategy of strategic prioritization, separating non-state parties into two groups. The first group included states considered to be close to joining the ATT based upon advancements made at the national level, including but not limited to signing and not ratifying the treaty. The second group were those states which have indicated that joining the ATT is a much longer prospect. The letters that the president of Sierra Leone wrote to the first group were personalized and sought to address the circumstances of those particular states. The president's letter was personally hand-delivered by me to 24 non-state parties, including 13 states from Africa, 7 states from Asia, 1 state from Europe, 1 state from the Americas, and 2 states from Oceania. 29 letters from the president were sent directly to diplomatic missions and consular offices of the remaining states in the second category. In addition, the CSP7 presidency has been working on a project to engage members of parliament in the universalization of the ATT. I must mention at this point that on account of the letter, we did get acknowledgements from almost all of the countries that we sent the letters to. And we got a very positive feedback from many of them, and a very concrete one from at least one of them, the Gambia, which sent a representative and which have announced yesterday that they will be joining the treaty. So in addition to those efforts, as I mentioned, to kick off the project in a more concrete way, another concrete way, a joint letter signed by me, the president, CSP7 president, and the Interparliamentary Union Secretary General, Mr. Martin Chongong, requesting parliamentarians to raise awareness of the treaty and generate a constructive dialogue on the impacts of the illicit flows of small arms and light weapons, has been sent out to 80+ parliaments across the world. I felt this was extremely important because during my round of meetings with ambassadors and heads of missions, distributing the letter from my president, I became aware of the fact that much of the problem could be procedural, that some of the ratification efforts are bogged down because of lack of capacity of parliament or lack of awareness of the serious problems that ATT wishes to address. During the informal consultations held in July of this year, Argentina and Sierra Leone, the co-chairs, organized 2 online meetings on universalization to build momentum in the lead up to CSP7. The first meeting was for a group of 16 states that were assessed as being likely to join the ATT. And the second meeting was for a group of 38 states. Officials based in Geneva and capitals around the world were invited to the meetings. Also participating were the ATT Secretariat, which spoke on the process to be undertaken to become a state party and support that is available for that. And Control Arms, which spoke on why states should join the treaty. The co-chairs welcomed the participation of all states, especially Colombia, Fiji, Kenya, Malaysia, the Philippines, Turkey, and Zimbabwe, all of which spoke on where they stand in terms of joining the treaty, particularly the progress made and challenges encountered towards joining the ATT. Some countries expressed the specific challenges they encounter in joining the treaty, including, but not limited to, volatile neighborhoods and the security concerns posed by adjacent countries that have not yet joined the treaty. There were also, as I mentioned, bureaucratic hurdles, particularly changes in the composition of parliament and key executive offices delaying the domestic ratification process. Throughout this work on universalization, our working group has coordinated with other stakeholders, including civil society. We, the co-chairs, have met with the state, which has a significant role in international arms trade, on its status in relation to the ATT. The co-chairs highlighted the importance of the participation and engagement of that state in the next CSP7 and invited that state to join its status in relation to the ATT, mainly taking into account the importance of the participation of these states in the diversion information exchange forum meetings, in which, due to confidentiality of the information that this subsidiary body shares, only the state parties and signatories are able to participate. Let me now give the floor to my co-chair, Ambassador Villegas, to present the rest of the report. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning to all, and thank you very much for the introduction of our work together. I would like to complement what Ambassador Berry mentioned with some few remarks. First of all, the conclusion of our joint working group is that states have extended their support to the universalization efforts that the working group is doing. Furthermore, in providing an update on universalization, the ATT Secretariat said that nowadays there are 100 state parties, 5 of which acceded in 2020, but we have to remember that those 5 acceded while we were in the pandemic. So that's a very good sign that even though the world was basically stopped, we still had 5 states that were engaged. Afghanistan, China, Namibia, Niue, and Sao Tome and Principe. And we're very glad with the announcement that the President also mentioned yesterday by the government of Gambia, which is a result of the very good work that the Ambassador Berry has been doing since he took office in Africa, for having other African states join. But as the Secretary mentioned, the rate of universalization has been decreasing. That is why we should not put our guard down on having an aggressive, in a positive way, aggressive public diplomacy of ATT to have more states joining. Just some few points of the discussions we had on universalization with other states. And information. The European Union announced that it is going to fund the publication of the ATT Universalization Toolkit. The toolkit will be published in a brochure in advance of this conference. In Asia, for example, the Republic of Korea reminded participants that in 2020 it had earmarked funds to translate the ATT Universalization Toolkit and the Welcome Pack into several Asian languages. Japan expressed its gratitude for this work and the importance of increasing outreach to the Asia-Pacific region. The Philippines informed that it was making efforts to harmonize their national legislation with the treaty's obligations, and added that its government is working on ratifying the treaty as soon as the necessary conditions were met. It also encouraged greater outreach to the Asian region. Some states provided updates on their universalization activities undertaken since CSP6. They shared information on domestic legislative processes and their efforts to harmonize their national legislation with the treaty's obligation as a precondition to ratification. They also discussed bilateral outreach meetings, regional workshops, as well as assistance received and provided to support their efforts to join the treaty. Participants also highlighted the importance of international cooperation and assistance in assisting countries to strengthen their national capacities to fulfill their obligations under the treaty, underlined the importance of carrying out outreach to parliamentarians in countries who are likely to ratify or accede to the treaty. Several proposals were made to strengthen the coordination of universalization efforts. For instance, a proposal was made to hold informal meetings in advance of each conference to facilitate enhanced coordination and collaboration among ATT office holders and states parties on treaty universalization strategies. Others highlighted that the efforts should be focused on arms exporting and importing countries, as well as in those regions with limited ATT engagement. Panama informed the participants of its contribution to treaty universalization through the Human Rights Council Universal Periodic Review Mechanism by recommending to states under review to positively consider ratifying the ATT. Some delegations highlighted the important role played by civil society in ATT outreach activities. And Control Arms presented efforts it has undertaken to promote ATT universalization in the regions of Asia Pacific, the Middle East, North of Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, while highlighting the need for more assistance to be provided to countries of those regions. We were reminded that all stakeholders have an important role to play in promoting and achieving universalization of the ATT. So the question now, taking into account what the Secretary informed in the last report regarding the decreasing rate of universalization with fewer states shown in the treaty each year is, which is the best way to move forward on ATT universalization? As you know, universalization is critical to achieving the objectives of the ATT. Although 2020 saw 5 new state parties to the ATT, greater efforts will be needed in the future to maintain such momentum. From the work undertaken this year with Ambassador Berry, and especially the feedback received during our informal consultations and CSP7 President's bilateral meetings, Ambassador Berry and I, as co-chairs, have concluded that the following points will be important towards making progress on universalization. First, ongoing efforts are needed to promote understanding of the ATT's objectives among non-state parties. All too often, there is a misperception that this is a disarmament treaty. Second, it is important to engage in dialogue addressing the benefits of ATT at both the national and regional levels. Such dialogue can respond to concerns that states may have about how joining the ATT will impact on their security. Third, for some states, cooperation and assistance will be essential to their joining and implementing the ATT. For this reason, ATT states parties and stakeholders must continue to explore all avenues for promoting and supporting the Voluntary Trust Fund. Fourth, direct dialogue with non-state parties is needed to understand what are the challenges to progressing universalization and where support could be provided. Fifth, coordination and information sharing among ATT office holders, the fund, state parties, and ATT stakeholders will assist universalization efforts. Such coordination could be facilitated through informal exchanges led by future presidents. And finally, ATT state parties could make a significant contribution to treaty universalization through the Human Rights Council Universal Periodic Review Mechanism by recommending to states under review to positively consider ratifying the ATT. This is a new element in our universalization strategy that has come in the last year. And indeed, we have to remember that the ATT is the first treaty ever to link arms trade with human rights because, of course, as we all know, the objective of preventing armed diversion to fall in the wrong hands to commit atrocities. Therefore, the interdisciplinary and mainstreaming of ATT in different bodies, it's very important. And the new element of this last year of having several delegations in the Universal Periodic Review recommending states to accede the ATT as a way of promoting human rights, it's a very good public diplomacy strategy for us. And it will be encouraged to other states to use this in their future approaches to the Universal Periodic Review. Thank you very much for your attention, and I yield the floor to our distinguished friend, President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. Thank you, thank you. We shall now proceed to opening the floor for speakers. I have a list of 13 confirmed speakers. I'll suggest in the interest of time that we limit our contributions to around 2 minutes. We certainly don't want the situation that happened yesterday whereby a major item had to be pushed to the next day. We don't have too many days left for this conference. So let me read out the list of names and then we'll, in order in which they will speak. Mexico, New Zealand, China, European Union, Spain, Japan, Honduras. We have Haiti, and we have a list of organizations, Interparliamentary Union, Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons, ICRC, and we have NGOs and Industry, Control Arms, and MAD for Peace, Development, and Human Rights. I have before the 4 countries, Cameroon, United States of America, Philippines, and the Republic of Korea. So we'll do that. Mexico, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Mi delegación desea reconocer los esfuerzos realizados por los copresidentes del Grupo de Trabajo sobre Universalización, el embajador Lanzana Gueveri de Sierra Leona y el embajador Federico Villegas de Argentina. El alto número de Estados miembros del tratado, a casi 7 años de su entrada en vigor, es algo muy significativo si se compara con la dinámica de otros instrumentos en materia de control de armamentos. La actual desaceleración del ritmo de adhesiones al tratado no debe interpretarse como la falta de apoyo al mismo. Es normal que en los primeros años se sumen los países que más apoyan su contenido y que en el mediano plazo lograr nuevas ratificaciones y adhesiones requiera de acciones más focalizadas, en las que se tomen en cuenta las razones que han impedido a los países que no lo han hecho sumarse al ATT. Es por ello que resulta muy relevante el reporte de los copresidentes del Grupo de Universalización sobre los resultados de sus contactos con estados que aún no son miembros. Consideramos acertado el enfoque de los copresidentes de dialogar con los estados que no son partes, separándolos entre los que parecen estar en el proceso de ratificarlo y los que ven la adhesión como algo más lejano. Sería importante adoptar un enfoque más persuasivo hacia dichos países con base en los insumos recibidos. Consideramos que el reporte de los copresidentes confirma que enfocarse en la concientización de los parlamentos tiene un gran potencial para generar avances en los procesos de ratificación en algunos estados signatarios, por lo que se debe continuar trabajando con estos actores. Junto con ello, estimamos que otro criterio a priorizar para futuros contactos de los copresidentes debe ser atraer al tratado a los principales exportadores e importadores en las distintas regiones, que en gran medida influencian las tendencias del comercio de armas. Además, sería muy útil que los estados partes y las partes interesadas incluyan en sus contactos e intercambios bilaterales, regionales y multilaterales la promoción del ATT y, de ser posible, ofrezcan y proporcionen apoyo y orientación para la adopción e implementación del tratado. De especial relevancia en esta tarea ha sido el trabajo de diversos actores internacionales, en especial de organizaciones de la sociedad civil, que han llevado a cabo un intenso activismo a favor de la universalidad y a quienes reconocemos su labor. Señor presidente y distinguidos delegados, para que el ATT logre sus objetivos, Se requiere que todos los Estados miembros de la comunidad internacional se comprometan con sus disposiciones. De otra forma, siempre habrá espacios que serán aprovechados por traficantes de armas que alimentan el conflicto y la violencia, y por países que les facilitan esa labor, sea de manera voluntaria o involuntaria. Alcanzar la universalidad del tratado es, en este contexto, una tarea prioritaria. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mexico. We went a little over time. Kindly, delegates, we are getting more list people wanting to speak, and we want to give every delegate a chance to speak out. Thank you very much, Mexico, for those very kind words. The next speaker, New Zealand, kindly take the floor.
Thank you very much. Aotearoa New Zealand welcomes you, Ambassador, to the presidency of this conference. We thank you for ensuring that it's able to proceed in a hybrid format, which we see as the most inclusive option available to us in the current circumstances. Despite the devastating and wide-ranging consequences of COVID-19, it's crucial that the ATT community continues to meet regularly to take stock of our treaty's progress in achieving its aims of establishing a gold standard for regulating the international trade in conventional arms, as well as preventing and eradicating their illicit trade and diversion. Although I did not take the floor under the previous agenda item, please be assured that New Zealand fully supports your working paper and the sharing of best practices to prevent the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, strengthening stockpile management and security in order to prevent diversion. New Zealand welcomes that in 7 years, our treaty has 110 states parties and 31 signatories. We extend a special welcome to the treaty's newest state party, our Pacific neighbour, Niue. Yet it is concerning that the rate of universalisation appears to be tapering off. This is in part to be expected, and we appreciate the challenging environment for outreach and some states' limited capacity to engage on the ATT at present, given their competing priorities. But we must continue to champion the treaty's universalisation by thinking of creative ways to promote the treaty's benefits, to understand the challenges to universalisation, by responding to the concerns of states outside the treaty, and to providing support where it is required, including through the Voluntary Trust Fund. For our part, New Zealand has continued our close and regular bilateral engagements with our partners in the Pacific in a virtual format over the past year. There is broad recognition that universalisation of the ATT, including realising its important security and developmental benefits, is strongly in the interest of states in our region. One concern we often hear about joining the ATT is the burden of annual reporting. To this end, we welcome the efforts of the co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, Mexico and Romania, to improve the voluntary reporting templates and make them more user-friendly. We also gratefully acknowledge the support provided by the EU for the publication of the Universalisation Toolkit in all official UN languages. Finally, we wish to remind states and observers that the model legislation produced by New Zealand and the Small Arms Survey to assist prospective states in preparing for their membership is available both online and in hard copy. I thank you.
And I thank you very much, New Zealand, and thanks for the support to our paper. Next, we have China.
谢谢主席。主席先生，中国代表团对条约秘书处、塞拉利昂主席、阿根廷主席全面详细的报告表示感谢。对 WGTU 工作组为促进条约普遍化所做的还有条约秘书处。 为WGTU 工作组为促进条约普遍化所做的卓有成效的工作表示感谢。对甘比亚宣布加入 ATT 表示欢迎。中方注意到，条约生效近7年来，条约的宗旨和目标 正得到越来越多国家的认同，缔约国数量目前已达110个，条约普遍性持续提升。去年7月， 中国正式加入条约，成为缔约国大家庭中的一员，中方为此感到高兴和自豪。同时，中方也注意到，一些重要武器贸易国仍未入约，特别是某个最大的常规武器出口国，不仅未批约，还撤销了签署。中方呼吁有关国家纠正错误做法，尽快批准并加入条约。同时，我们还呼吁其他国家积极考虑并尽快加入条约。中方认为，加强国际合作与援助对于提升条约普遍性具有重要意义。一些发展中国家在履约方面可能面临一些现实的能力、技术和资金等方面的困难。中方呼吁有能力的国家加强面向发展中国家的国际合作与援助，鼓励更多国家加入条约。中方愿同各缔约国一道，帮助有需要的国家增强入约意愿，加强履约能力建设，为促进各国有效履约、提高条约普遍性发挥积极作用。谢谢主席。
Thank you, China. We have there's one more name speaker, ASER. After that, I would like to suggest that we close the speakers list. So I go straight to European Union, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor, and thank you for your personal efforts towards further universalization and for the efforts of your co-chair, Ambassador Villegas. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries Turkey, Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Albania, and the EFTA countries Iceland, Norway, members of the EEA, as well as Georgia, align themselves with this statement. As stakeholders and states parties to the ATT, it is our common goal to establish the highest possible standards in the international trade in conventional arms and to prevent and eradicate the illicit trade in conventional arms and ammunition and prevent their diversion. At the same time, we need to step up our efforts and continue to... Sorry? I'll continue. At the same time, we need to step up our efforts and continue to work towards full universalization of these norms. We reiterate our call on all UN member states, especially the major arms importers, exporters, and transit states, to sign, ratify, or accede to the ATT without further delay. The EU urges other states parties to increase our collective engagement and outreach efforts to non-state parties, underlining the benefits of joining the ATT and thus contributing to international and regional peace and security and stability. We very much welcome the letter sent by the President of Sierra Leone calling on states to accede to the ATT. The EU considers it important to renew the momentum in order to achieve full universalization of this important treaty. Since the last CSP, the ATT has entered into force for Afghanistan, China, Niue, and Sao Tome and Principe. We hope the accession of Afghanistan and China will inspire other countries in Asia to follow suit shortly. Of course, we very much welcome also the announcement made by the Minister of Defense from Gambia yesterday. The EU and its member states continue to play an active role in ATT universalization efforts through the various EU outreach programs and in bilateral dialogues on disarmament, on proliferation and arms control. We call on all states parties to advocate for the ratification of the ATT in their own high-level bilateral contexts. It is essential that the treaty receives the necessary attention, including at the political level. It is not the ATT's objective to hinder the legitimate arms trade or to impose measures regulating the trade of arms on the domestic market. The ATT clearly recognizes the legitimate rights and interests of states with regard to the arms trade and production, as well as the right to self-defense enshrined in Article 51 of the Charter, of the UN Charter. It is neither an exporters treaty nor an importers treaty. The ATT is relevant to all participants in the international trade in conventional arms. In this regard, we hope that the publication of the ATT Universalization Toolkit, already mentioned by many, adopted by all states parties at the 5th Conference of States Parties, will contribute to common understanding of the treaty objectives and will serve to strengthen universalization outreach activities. We're pleased that we could fund the printing of the toolkit into a brochure in all UN languages so that we could join the excellent initiative of the Republic of Korea, who translated this toolkit in several other languages. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, European Union. Thank you. The next speaker is Spain.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente, y muchas gracias también al embajador Villegas. Me gustaría, en primer lugar, y como ya han hecho las delegaciones que me han precedido en el uso de la palabra, dar la bienvenida a los estados que se han adherido al tratado en los últimos 12 meses: Afganistán, China, Niue y Santo Tomé y Príncipe. También España da la bienvenida al anuncio pronunciado ayer por Gambia. Celebramos que el tratado ya cuente con 110 estados parte, comprometidos en la prevención y en la erradicación del tráfico ilícito de armas. Recordamos que la adhesión al tratado implica no solo ese compromiso con la prevención de los desvíos a los mercados ilícitos, también implica responsabilidades y el cumplimiento de una serie de obligaciones en materia de transparencia, en materia de rendición de cuentas y en materia de cooperación con el resto de estados parte. En este sentido, mi delegación hace un llamamiento a los 31 estados signatarios del tratado para que completen el proceso de ratificación y adhesión al mismo. Y especialmente hacemos un llamamiento tanto a los 54 estados miembros de las Naciones Unidas que aún no se han adherido, como al estado que, pese a haber firmado, ha declarado no tener intenciones de completar su adhesión, para que estos reconsideren sus posiciones. Señor presidente, la universalización del tratado es clave para que éste cumpla sus objetivos de manera comprensiva y global. Los estados parte debemos hacer todo lo que esté a nuestro alcance para conseguir que las disposiciones del tratado obliguen a todos y en todos los territorios. De esta manera no existirán resquicios legales ni geográficos que puedan permitir desvíos de armas hacia mercados ilícitos, especialmente cuando todavía quedan fuera del tratado algunos estados que son productores, exportadores, importadores o territorio de tránsito de cantidades significativas de armas. Su adhesión es un anhelo, pero también es un desafío y una enorme responsabilidad que compartimos los estados parte en su conjunto. Por este motivo, señor presidente, puede contar con el total apoyo y el profundo agradecimiento de mi delegación por sus labores al frente del Grupo de Trabajo de Universalización junto al embajador Villegas de Argentina. Por último, también queremos agradecer a la Unión Europea por sus esfuerzos para poner en marcha el paquete de herramientas para promover la universalización. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Spain. Thank you very much for the support, and that sets the gold standard right on time. Next on my list, Japan.
Mr. Co-Chairs, first of all, Japan would like to express its heartfelt welcome to the countries which have newly joined the treaty. Japan would like to express also its sincere gratitude to Ambassador Guberi and Ambassador Villegas for their treaty universalization efforts as co-chairs for the working group on treaty universalization throughout the CSP7 cycle, despite the unprecedented circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like also to thank the Director of Secretariat for his very informative presentation. When Japan co-chaired this working group during the CSP4 and CSP5 cycles, we often heard from non-state parties the importance of explanatory packages about the significance of the ATT. Japan also realized that accessibility to those documents in their own languages was key for them to promote their understanding on the importance of the ATT, and in particular, to enable their national stakeholders to engage in the path towards joining the treaty. This consideration has led to the adoption of the universalization toolkit and welcome pack at CSP7, which were translated into the UN official languages and made available on the ATT website. Japan highly appreciates the initiative by the government of the Republic of Korea to translate them into the Asian languages, and would also like to thank the European Union for the publication of the ATT Universalization Toolkit in a brochure format ahead of the CSP7. As expressed in the working group in April, Japan places great importance on the universalization of the ATT, in particular in the Asia-Pacific region. Together with Australia, New Zealand, and Control Arms, Japan co-hosted the Asia-Pacific Universalization Roundtable in a virtual format in June this year. Japan has also encouraged non-state parties to join the treaty, taking the opportunity to hold bilateral dialogues on disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control where possible. On this occasion, Japan would like to encourage all non-state parties, including signatory states and observer states, to join the treaty as soon as possible. Japan will continue to work for the universalization of the ATT. I thank you, co-chairs.
And I thank you very much, Japan. Next on my list, Honduras.
Señor Presidente, luego de haber escuchado con detenimiento la presentación general de la Secretaría sobre el estado de participación en el tratado y el informe rendido por el Grupo de Trabajo sobre universalización de este importante tema, traslado las felicitaciones y el agradecimiento de mi gobierno y el de mi delegación por las labores que el Grupo de Trabajo ha conducido a lo largo de este último y complicado año. Difundir, promover y dar a conocer los fundamentos del tratado es uno de los pilares principales del mismo. Alcanzar la cifra de 110 estados partes miembros es fiel reflejo del esfuerzo realizado por los copresidentes en particular, quienes han sabido navegar las dificultades y llevar a puerto seguro acciones como las consultas oficiosas realizadas en julio del presente año. Pero también deseo referirme con mucho agradecimiento a las gestiones de alto nivel emprendidas por su excelencia el presidente de Sierra Leona, lo que ha dado un nuevo impulso al aumento del número de ratificaciones del mismo. Igualmente deseo señalar el apoyo y el respaldo que la sociedad civil y las organizaciones no gubernamentales han realizado en esta importante materia. Nos congratulamos por los avances alcanzados por el Grupo de Trabajo en la publicación de la Guía de Universalización del Tratado y la traducción del paquete de bienvenida de nuevos estados parte. Señor Presidente, Honduras celebra y alienta los esfuerzos que se realizan en materia de universalización, pero considera que es necesario alentar con más fuerza un avance decidido en la consecución de los objetivos que el tratado contempla. En tal sentido, y siguiendo la lógica expresada por el embajador Villegas en su calidad de copresidente, y relacionado también con el punto 4, que como ya es conocido no pudimos participar en el mismo, se emitió mi gobierno con el fin de armonizar aún más la legislación nacional a los fines del tratado. Se emitió una nueva ley de control de armas de fuego, municiones, explosivos y materiales relacionados, la que entró en vigor el 8 de febrero de 2019. Siguiendo esa misma lógica de subrayar la importancia de la implementación, se crearon las fuerzas institucionales bilaterales que operan en la frontera terrestre que Honduras tiene con 3 países de la región centroamericana y cuya finalidad es combatir todo tipo de ilícitos relacionados con la finalidad del tratado y evitar que las armas lleguen a los grupos vinculados a la delincuencia. Igualmente deseo destacar que las instituciones de defensa y seguridad de Honduras han implementado un mecanismo que mantiene debidamente inventariadas y almacenadas las armas conforme a sus números de serie, llevándose un control estricto debido a su asignación a las fuerzas. Informe que anualmente se revisa. Y asimismo hemos implementado un mecanismo mediante el cual toda arma decomisada por portación ilegal o la comisión de diversos ilícitos son depositadas en almacenes y luego de los peritajes legales se determina si se procede o no a la destrucción de estas. Señor presidente, concluyo mi intervención dando la bienvenida a los nuevos estados parte que se han unido a este gran esfuerzo y subrayando que, en opinión de mi delegación, el diálogo y la cooperación son los elementos centrales hacia la universalización del tratado. Muchas gracias.
And I thank you very much, Honduras. Next on my list, I have Haiti.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La délégation haïtienne tient à vous féliciter pour la sagesse et la dextérité avec lesquelles vous dirigez les travaux de cette 7e conférence des États partis au traité sur le commerce des armes autour du terme « Consolider les efforts visant à éradiquer le commerce illicite des armes légères et de petit calibre et à assurer une gestion efficace des stocks ». Elle profite pour saluer les efforts déployés par le groupe de travail sur l'universalisation sous le leadership de la coprésidence sierra-léonaise et argentine, en dépit du contexte particulier qui est caractérisé par la pandémie du COVID-19. Monsieur le Président, la délégation est consciente que cette année, après avoir signé le traité, le processus de ratification n'est pas encore abouti sur le plan interne. La situation politique actuelle du pays, marquée par un dysfonctionnement du Parlement depuis plus d'1 an, ne permet pas d'envisager des progrès au niveau de la ratification avant les prochaines élections législatives qui se dérouleront d'ici la fin de cette année. Ma délégation reste toutefois préoccupée par le commerce illégal des armes légères qui contribue à l'amplification de la violence armée au cœur de la capitale haïtienne et dans certaines villes de province, qui aggrave les conditions socio-économiques de la population et crée également l'instabilité politique. À cause de ce trafic illicite, les gangs armés terrorisent la population haïtienne et constituent de sérieux freins dans la poursuite des objectifs de développement durable. Le 7 juillet dernier, Haïti a fait la triste et amère expérience du crapuleux assassinat par un groupe d'individus armés du président de la République, son Excellence M. Jovenel Moïse. Ce tact est une terrible conséquence du commerce illicite des armes. Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement haïtien, en collaboration avec les pays amis d'Haïti, continuera à prendre au niveau national toute une série de mesures en vue d'éradiquer ce fléau. L'assistance technique offerte dans le cadre du traité sur le commerce des armes doit être envisagée dans ce cas. Alors que les foyers de tensions armées s'activent un peu partout dans le monde, Haïti croit qu'il est urgent que les violons s'accordent entre les États en vue de mettre fin au commerce illicite des armes légères, ce en faveur de la paix et de la sécurité internationale. Pour conclure, ma délégation voudrait réaffirmer la volonté de la République d'Haïti à être partie prenante au traité sur le commerce des armes aussitôt que les conditions constitutionnelles auront été réunies sur le plan interne. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
I thank you, Haiti, and although we have done this in the bilateral way, I'll do so now as well to express condolences on that the tragic events leading to the death of your Prime Minister, President. We will now move on to Interparliamentary Union.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I'm speaking on behalf of the IPU Secretary General, Mr. Martin Chungung, who is unfortunately not available today. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, while no one can deny the terrible humanitarian impact illicit arms flows have on populations, these flows escalate violence, destabilize societies and communities, and lead to human insecurity, all of which have countless devastating long-term consequences. They jeopardize the future of millions, especially that of women and young people. As the Global Organization of National Parliaments, the Interparliamentary Union addresses regularly the issue and advocates for a strengthened control of trafficking in small arms and light weapons. Already in its 2006 resolution, the IPU called on parliaments to engage actively in combating illicit trade and diversion of conventional arms and encourage them to agree to a set of global principles for international arms transfers. However, in spite of the many achievements in this area, much remains to be done. The fact that so many nations are yet to take meaningful steps toward ridding their societies of these everyday tools of violence shows that we need to better understand the reasons behind non-adherence to the treaty. There can be no blanket application of solutions, which is why we need to change our approach to consider the diversity of people's needs while prioritizing their safety and security and fostering national ownership of the different solutions. Parliaments and parliamentarians as people representatives are the bridge between populations and governments. They can advocate and legislate for societies free of armed violence to allow their constituents to prosper. Parliaments are the best place to promote the Armed Trade Treaty as a tool to eradicate the root of illicit weapons proliferation and improve people's lives. To help raise the interest and commitment of parliaments and advance ATT universalization, the IPU has prepared, as you kindly mentioned, Mr. President, a project to gather parliamentarians of states that are not yet a party to the ATT to discuss and address the specific roadblocks as they are holding them back from joining the treaty. The project was built with inputs from the permanent mission of Sierra Leone in Geneva. On the 2nd of September, we will jointly hold an interactive panel to share more information on this initiative. I encourage you to register for the event, and we would also highly appreciate your support to this parliamentary initiative. Well, to conclude, I would like to emphasize that there can be no development without peace and security. Sustainable development and sustainable peace can only be achieved by the people. Thank you for your attention.
And I thank you very much, IPU. I thank you. Next on my list, Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's an honor to greet you on behalf of the Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons. My name is Karin Olofsson and I'm the Secretary General of the Forum. I would like to express heartfelt gratitude to the President of CSP7, Your Excellency Lansana Geberi, for your tireless efforts towards the ATT, working to eradicate illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and ensures efficient stockpile management, which is the thematic focus of this ATT presidency. Armed conflicts and violence, independent of their scale, are perpetrated by the uncontrolled availability of SOLV, highlighting the need for concise and effective steps to tackle its proliferation. According to the Small Arms Survey, more than 1 billion SOLV are circulating worldwide, causing the death of over 223,300 people every year. The consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrate that the widespread availability of SOLV hinders efforts to provide humanitarian and development support to the most vulnerable. The UN has stated an increase in domestic violence of approximately 30% since the outbreak of the pandemic. The Institute for Economics and Peace estimated that more than 400 million young people lived in violent contexts. This underscores the interconnectedness of society's challenges and the importance of the women, peace and security and the youth peace and security agendas in arms control processes. Members of Parliament, MPs, play a central role in preventing SOLV-related violence, given their legislative oversight and awareness-raising roles, holding governments accountable, and in bridging the gap between international arms control instruments and the regional and national level. This allows MP to enhance universalization efforts, ownership, and implementation of the ATT. We are pleased to learn about the efforts of the ATT presidency and the IPU, as previously mentioned here, to engage MPs in the universalization of the treaty. The forum has also implemented projects including MPs' efforts in Africa, Asia and Pacific, Latin America, and Middle East and Northern Africa on universalization and implementation since its inception. And we remain committed to further support parliamentary action and for cooperation. The forum is hosting a side event precisely on the issue on September 3rd, and you are all warmly welcome. Furthermore, the forum, as co-sponsor and publishing partner, contributes to the process of the Parliamentary Handbook, Assuring Our Common Future, to support the vital UN Secretary General's disarmament agenda. Actively including women and young MPs in ATT universalization and implementation is essential for policies to reflect adequately the realities of those affected by illicit arms transfers. Therefore, we encourage all states to consider parliamentary involvement, as well as understanding the national realities faced by MPs in the implementation of the treaty. Finally, the pandemic and its consequences have demonstrated how crucial it is for the world to come together, to unite, to prevent the uncontrolled availability of SOLVE, for the security, rights, and well-being of every child, woman, and man, to reduce human suffering. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much. Thank you, Parliamentary Forum. I now move to ICRC.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll deliver abridged remarks. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, expresses its appreciation to you, Mr. President, and to Ambassador Villegas for your work as co-chairs of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization. The ICRC welcomes yesterday's announcement by the Gambia that it will join the treaty. There is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has presented us all with unprecedented challenges. And this is possibly why we have seen no states joining the treaty since the last Conference of States Parties. It is incumbent on all stakeholders now to make sure this remains an exception. The ICRC urges all signatories and all states that are not yet party to the ATT to accede to the treaty at the earliest opportunity. The ICRC also acknowledges and welcomes steps taken by several states at the national level to enable their adherence to the treaty. And we stand ready to support these efforts. The ICRC's advisory service on IHL here in Geneva and our delegations Our delegations in capitals around the world offer their technical assistance to states in support of the adoption and implementation of the treaty. In the ICRC's view, the co-chair's draft report rightly underlines the importance of dialogue with states not yet party to promote understanding of the ATT's objectives, dispel any misconceptions, and highlight the treaty's humanitarian benefits. Over the course of last year, the ICRC has promoted adherence with non-signatory states in Latin America, Europe, East Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Recognizing the specificities of regional arms dynamics, the ICRC supports the identification and creation of opportunities to discuss the treaty at regional and sub-regional levels. For example, in Africa, we collaborate closely with the African Union in the framework of its Silencing the Guns initiative. The ICRC and the Pretoria office of the Institute for Security Studies also co-hosted an online webinar entitled Time for Action on the Arms Trade Treaty in November 2020. And later this year, our annual East African Regional IHL conference will focus on the ATT. The ICRC will continue to work tirelessly to support states parties in their implementation of the ATT to the highest possible standard. The faithful implementation of the treaty is the most compelling testimony to its effectiveness and will go a long way in attracting other states to join. Thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much. I now move on to quickly Control Arms, please.
Mr. President, Control Arms wishes to express its appreciation for the work of the co-chairs of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization. Even with no new state parties this year, the work conducted on universalization amid the COVID-19 pandemic has laid a solid foundation, which we hope will result in concrete outcomes in the coming year. We also welcome the announcement made by the Gambia of its intention to accede to the Arms Trade Treaty and look forward to welcoming it as a state party. In moving forward on universalization, Control Arms supports the conclusion in the WGTU report that coordination and information sharing between all stakeholders can assist universalization efforts. In this regard, forming an informal universalization contact group in Geneva could be a practical initiative to advance universalization, even during a time when delegations must operate within the restrictions imposed by COVID-19. Control Arms calls on the WGTU to focus its efforts on regional engagement approaches as set out in the original WGTU mandate. Many states who have not yet joined the ATT, especially in Asia and the Middle East and North Africa, can benefit from tailored outreach and engagement to address specific regional challenges. Engaging regional stakeholders to lead these efforts is critical to its success. In this regard, with Germany's support, Control Arms is studying the potential impact regional organization can have on ATT universalization and implementation. We also encourage the WGTU to set a target on universalization. A concrete and tangible number, such as 125 states parties by 2025, could assist in galvanizing all stakeholders' efforts on universalization and bring much needed focus to this area of work. For our part, Control Arms has continued to follow up directly with non-state parties to encourage them to join the treaty. This year, we again welcome the opportunity to co-host with Australia, Japan, and New Zealand a roundtable on universalization in the Asia-Pacific region. We look forward to the first ASEAN member state joining the ATT. Control Arms also continues to highlight the positive impact of the ATT on the national, regional, and international levels by directly engaging with national governments through its ATT Academy programs. Finally, Control Arms welcomes the European Union Council decision in support of the universalization of the ATT. This is an important initiative and one that we hope will make a significant progress. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Control Arms. And let me once again thank Control Arms for the enormous support that they've given this presidency. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next on my list, MAD for Peace, Development and Human Rights.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. ترحب مؤسسة معهد للسلام والتنمية وحقوق الإنسان بعقد المؤتمر السابع للدول الأطراف وتثمن بالجهود المبذولة من جانب المشاركين للالتزام بالمعاهدة وتستغل الفرصة للمشاركة في تلك المناقشة الهامة المتعلقة بعالمية المعاهدة. كما ترحب معهد بالجهود المبذولة في دعم الدول للانضمام إلى المعاهدة. فالأمم المتحدة في عملها لمساعدة الناس في جميع أنحاء العالم تواجه كل يوم التأثير السلبي للتراخي في الضوابط على تجارة الأسلحة، حيث أدى التوافر الجاهز للأسلحة والذخيرة إلى معاناة الإنسانية وقمع سياسي وجرائم حرب وإرهاب بين السكان المدنيين، حيث مكن لعمليات النقل الغير مشروعة للأسلحة تزعزع الأمن في المنطقة وأدى إلى انتهاك قرارات مجلس الأمن بحظر توريد الأسلحة وساهم في انتهاك حقوق الإنسان والقانون الدولي الإنساني. الأهم من ذلك عدم تشجيع الاستثمار وتعطيل التنمية في البلدان التي تعاني من النزاعات ومستويات عالية من العنف، مما يؤثر أيضاً على قدرتها على تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة. من أهم أهداف التنمية المستدامة سيد الرئيس هو التثقيف وتعليم، فأصبح من الضروري توسيع نطاق التدريب والتثقيف الشباب مما سوف يزيد من الترويج للاتفاقية، فأصبح تدريب الشباب وتثقيفهم بخطورة استخدام الأسلحة هام للغاية. فهناك 20% من فئة الشباب الذين لديهم معرفة فقط بالمعاهدة وأيضاً بخطورة تلك الأسلحة، وهناك أيضاً 30% من المنظمات المجتمع المدني التي تقوم بالتوعية والتدريب حول تلك المعاهدة. وهذا حسب دراسة أجرتها مؤسسة معد. لذلك توصي مؤسسة معد إشراك الشباب في ابتكار مبادرات لتسهيل التخلص من الأسلحة الصغيرة والخفيفة وتثقيفهم حولها، وأيضا مساعدة وتدريب منظمات المجتمع المدني بالأخص في المناطق المتأثرة بالنزاعات المسلحة في الترويج للمعاهدة. وأيضا نستغل تلك الفرصة وندعو دولة إيران للانضمام إلى الاتفاقية والحد من دعمها لميليشيات الحوثي ومدها بالأسلحة بطريقة غير مشروعة. شكرا سيادة الرئيس.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt, for peace, development, and human rights. I now call upon Cameroon to take the floor, please.
Monsieur le Président, au moment où il me soit l'insigne honneur de prendre la parole dans cette assemblée, et puisque c'est la première fois que ma délégation s'exprime au cours de ces travaux, permettez-moi de vous adresser les sincères félicitations du Cameroun pour le doigté et le professionnalisme avec lequel vous conduisez, notamment eu égard aux contraintes que nous impose la pandémie à Covid-19. Veuillez croire à la pleine et entière coopération de mon pays pour le succès de votre mandat. Alors que nous échangeons à présent sur l'universalisation du traité, mon pays souhaite relever avec emphase l'intérêt de ce point dans l'atteinte des idéaux de paix et de sécurité internationale chers à nos États. Distingués délégués, Mesdames, Messieurs, l'atteinte des objectifs assignés au TCA ne saurait être assurée qu'à travers une augmentation du nombre d'États parties. Mieux, l'effectivité et l'efficacité des normes communes pour une meilleure régulation des flux d'armes classiques, des munitions, de leurs pièces et composants resterait une chimère dans l'adhésion au TCA du plus grand nombre d'États. Qu'il me soit ici permis de saluer fraternellement et solennellement l'entrée de la Gambie dans le prestigieux cercle des États partis à notre cher traité. Au regard des expériences passées, la déstabilisation du pouvoir politique, telle qu'observée dans certains pays ces dernières semaines, laisse présager une augmentation des flux d'armes en circulation illicite dans quasiment toutes les régions du monde. Mais mieux que par le passé, le traité sur le commerce des armes nous offre une base solide pour anticiper et juguler la prolifération annoncée et les conséquences qui en découleraient. Conscient de la force destructrice des ALPC en libre circulation en Afrique centrale notamment, le Cameroun en appelle à une mobilisation agissante des pays qui n'ont pas encore adhéré à la communauté des États partis à notre traité. Permettez-moi, Mesdames, Messieurs, de rappeler brièvement le contexte dans lequel mon pays a rejoint cette communauté, jadis considérée comme havre de paix dans une sous-région en proie à de multiples remous. Le Cameroun, confronté aux affres de la menace terroriste au début des années 2012-2013, a jugé opportun de signer le TCA en 2014 et de le ratifier en 2018. Pour franchir ces différents paliers, mon pays s'est notamment, avec le concours des partenaires internationaux et précisément du Fonds d'affectation volontaire du TCA, longuement investi dans les campagnes de sensibilisation à l'effet de créer une synergie entre les parlementaires, les administrations, la société civile, les journalistes et d'autres parties prenantes à l'échelle nationale. Mesdames, Messieurs, pour ma délégation, la ratification est la clé d'une plus grande universalisation du traité. Certes, s'agit-il d'un processus long et complexe en fonction de l'ordre juridique de chaque État, mais sa portée devrait l'emporter sur toute autre considération, tant il vise à terme à préserver les vies humaines et garantir les conditions élémentaires d'une paix et d'un développement durable à nos populations. Je ne saurais clore mon propos sans rappeler les mesures prises par la plus haute autorité de mon pays pour promouvoir les buts et objectifs poursuivis par le TCA, tant au plan national que sous-régional. En effet, avant même la ratification du traité, le cadre juridique camerounais de lutte contre la circulation illicite des ALPC a été renforcé par l'adoption d'une loi le 14 décembre 2016 portant un régime général des armes et munitions. À ceci s'ajoute un décret de novembre 2018 portant création du Comité national de désarmement, de démobilisation et de réintégration. Sur le plan opérationnel et grâce au concours des différents partenaires, le Cameroun a abrité ou organisé une série d'activités destinées notamment à promouvoir la lutte contre la circulation illicite des armes à feu et donc à promouvoir l'universalisation du TCA. J'en veux pour preuve la cérémonie officielle de destruction symbolique des stocks d'armes saisis ou restitués par les détenteurs non autorisés qui s'est tenue le 19 mai dernier à Boya. Organisée grâce au soutien des Nations Unies, de l'Union africaine et d'autres partenaires multilatéraux et bilatéraux et présidée par le Premier ministre, chef du gouvernement, elle s'inscrivait dans le cadre de la commémoration du mois d'amnistie en Afrique, tenu qu'adopté dans l'initiative continentale Faire taire les armes en Afrique. Au-delà de son caractère symbolique, cette cérémonie a permis à mon pays de mener la réflexion nécessaire sur les défis qui l'interpellent dans cette lutte. À cela s'ajoutent les activités de renforcement des capacités organisées à Yaoundé en mai-juin 2021 grâce à l'appui de l'Allemagne et du Bureau des Affaires, du Bureau des Nations Unies pour les affaires d'armement. Elles étaient respectivement relatives à la prise en compte du genre et de la collecte des données nécessaires pour une mise en œuvre efficace du TCA et d'autres instruments internationaux pertinents, à l'instar de l'instrument international de traçage et de la Convention de Kinshasa. La présente tribune m'offre ainsi l'occasion d'en appeler à une plus grande solidarité des partenaires techniques et financiers en faveur des pays qui, à l'instar du Cameroun, font face aux conséquences d'une gestion embryonnaire des stocks. S'il est vrai que la loi camerounaise encadre la gestion des stocks, il n'en demeure pas moins vrai que pour mon pays et l'ensemble de la sous-région, la conservation des données aussi bien sous forme numérique que physique, telle que prévue par notre convention sous-régionale, reste l'un des principaux défis en la matière. Ainsi, serait-il souhaitable que les pays de l'Afrique centrale soient dotés de ressources et matériels appropriés pour le marquage personnalisé à l'usine et une bonne conservation des stocks d'armes et munitions. De même, nous serons gré aux partenaires bi- et multilatéraux de renforcer les capacités nationales de nos États dans le domaine du recyclage et de la destruction des surplus. En sa qualité de président en exercice de la Convention de l'Afrique centrale en matière de lutte contre les ALPC, dite Convention de Kinshasa, mon pays serait gré aux Nations Unies et aux autres partenaires dotés d'expertise des soutiens multiformes qu'il jugerait utile d'apporter à notre sous-région afin que nos populations soient définitivement épargnées de catastrophes liées à une gestion inexperte des armes et des munitions. Je vous remercie de votre bienveillante attention.
I thank you, Cameron, with great anticipation and a hearty welcome. I yield the floor to the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have come from Washington, D.C. this week to take the floor under the agenda item Treaty Universalization to underscore the continuing commitment of the United States to the responsible international trade in conventional arms. The United States has long supported strong and effective national controls on the international transfer of conventional arms, and the Arms Trade Treaty is an important tool for promoting those controls internationally. For the United States, our approach to arms transfers is laid out in our Conventional Arms Transfer Policy, or CAT policy. The Biden-Harris administration recognizes conventional arms transfers have significant implications for US national security and foreign policy interests, and the CAT policy establishes the United States priority and criteria used for adjudicating arms transfer decisions. The 2018 CAT policy reflected the previous administration's priorities, as did its decision in 2019 that it was not in the United States' national interest to become a state party to the ATT. President Biden has made clear that diplomacy and human rights are at the center of US foreign policy. We believe it's important to publicly reflect these changes in a new CAT policy, so we've been working to revise the policy to reflect this administration's priorities. This revised CAT policy will help us build and maintain strategic partnerships that reflect the values and interests of the United States. The revised policy will more clearly highlight the connection between the respect for international law and human rights and US national security interests in arms transfers. It will reflect this administration's priorities to strengthen alliances, lead with diplomacy, and elevate respect for international law and human rights. The new CAT policy will better frame the intent and priorities of the Biden-Harris administration and formalize the approach that the administration has adopted on arms transfers decisions that have been in effect since President Biden entered the White House in January. The revised CAT policy should be finalized shortly and released as a public document. When it is, the United States will then use that policy framework to review specific arms transfers issues, including determining the proper relationship of the United States to the Arms Trade Treaty. I look forward to being able to announce the results of that review at a future ATT meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States, and thank you for traveling all the way from Washington, D.C. to be with us here. I now yield the floor to the Philippines, please.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The Philippines continues to implement the provisions of the Strategic Trade Management Act, a law which seeks to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction by managing the trade in strategic goods. While this law specifically focuses on the local implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1540, it likewise touches on important elements of the ATT. Furthermore, a memorandum of agreement on trade facilitation of the exports of strategic goods was signed by the STMO together with the Bureau of Customs, the Philippine Investment Promotion Agencies, and other relevant agencies to ensure security of the supply chain from attempts of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction while guaranteeing ease of doing business and trade, especially for legitimate and compliant companies and exporters. Proposed amendments to the firearms law were submitted to the Legislative Department of the Philippines in order to strengthen the law and to harmonize it with the provisions of the ATT. Relevant Philippine government agencies have also been actively participating in various capacity building activities, webinars, and other related initiatives conducted by the European Union organizations, the US Department of State, our civil society partner, the Nonviolence International Southeast Asia, and many others to strengthen our knowledge and capacities in international arms control. Despite the challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Philippines has been working continuously to bring the country closer to ratifying the ATT. This resulted to the resumption of hearings on the ATT at the Philippine Senate, and we remain hopeful that this series of hearings will conclude with the Philippines ratifying and depositing its instrument of ratification to the UN Secretary General, along with the fact that the Philippines is already doing what states parties to the ATT are doing. Allow me to express and reiterate, Mr. President, our clear and unequivocal commitment to the noble aim of the ATT. And as a signatory state, we are grateful for the opportunity to actively participate in regional and international discussions on the subject, share our national position on important issues in the Conference of States Parties, and join the international community in the promotion of human rights and international law. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much, Philippines. I now yield the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea highly appreciates the efforts of the co-chairs of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization to reach out to those outside the ATT, even under these COVID-19 times. We'll welcome new states parties to the ATT, China, São Tomé and Príncipe, Afghanistan, and Niue, and the announcement of Gambia to join the ATT. We are delighted to see that 3 of these state parties are from the Asia Pacific region, where we have the least ATT participants at present. The Republic of Korea, for each part, will continue to work on the universalization efforts in the Asia Pacific region. As your start, we have completed the project of translating the Treaty Universalization Toolkit and the Welcome Pack into 10 Asian languages last year. We have posted these translated documents on the ATT website with the assistance of the Secretariat, and we hope that all stakeholders will find this useful for their own bilateral and multilateral outreach activities. Taking this opportunity, I would like to share that the Korean Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy has held virtual workshops in commemoration of the Trade and Security Day in July this year to raise awareness on export control and facilitate information exchange among industries and the relevant authorities. In addition, the Korean Defense Acquisition Program Administration will resume its annual International Export Control Conference in Seoul in June 2022 in 2 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we will reach out to participating industries and states as part of our universalization efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much, Republic of Korea. I now yield the floor to our last speaker on the list, Issa, ASER.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les délégués, nous espérons que vous allez tous bien. Monsieur le Président, Action, Sécurité, Éthique républicaine tient à vous féliciter de porter à l'attention de cette conférence le lien nécessaire entre la dynamique du programme d'action des Nations Unies en vue de prévenir, combattre et éradiquer le commerce illicite des armes légères et celle créée par les mises en œuvre du traité sur le commerce des armes. Ce lien est essentiel à la fois dans son aspect régulation-prévention, comme celui de l'élimination du commerce illicite d'armes classiques et empêcher le détournement de ces armes, particulièrement lorsqu'elles sont utilisées en infraction des articles 6 et 7 du TCA. Nous tenons aussi à complimenter le travail du secrétariat pour l'organisation de cette conférence dans des circonstances qui restent difficiles et souligner le besoin de lui assurer un véritable soutien financier. Monsieur le Président, Action Sécurité Éthique républicaine souhaite ici saluer la présence de la Chine en tant qu'État partie au TCA comme une preuve supplémentaire de la dynamique et la valeur universelle du traité. Nous espérons vivement que cela puisse inspirer les deux premiers exportateurs d'armes, les États-Unis et la Russie, afin qu'ils puissent s'inscrire eux aussi dans un processus vertueux et responsable dans le domaine des transferts d'armes, qu'ils sachent s'inscrire dans l'histoire pour rejoindre les 110 États aujourd'hui partis au TCA. Mais, Monsieur le Président, nous savons qu'il ne suffit pas de ratifier le TCA pour affirmer son universalité. Il s'agit de l'appliquer et un des principes fondamentaux de la Convention de Vienne sur le droit des traités, Pacta sunt servanda, est précisé dans son article 26. Tout traité en vigueur lie les parties et doit être exécuté par elles de bonne foi. Cette règle lie tous les États à la fois conventionnellement et coutumièrement. Elle représente un des fondements du TCA et un argument majeur dans son universalisation. Car l'un de ses freins, ainsi qu'à l'application des normes communes qu'il contient et auxquelles fait référence son article 1er, est celui de l'incorporation législative incomplète dans les pays qui doivent procéder à une telle incorporation pour donner effet à leurs engagements internationaux dans l'ordre juridique interne. Tel est notamment le cas du Canada, les lacunes juridiques de la législation fédérale ayant d'ailleurs été récemment mises en lumière dans le rapport spécial d'Amnesty International Canada et de l'Institut Rideau concernant les exportations vers l'Arabie saoudite dans la guerre au Yémen. On peut notamment y lire les modifications apportées à la loi sur les licences d'exportation et d'importation n'incorporent pas complètement le TCA dans la loi canadienne et ne prend pas en compte 3 obligations du TCA, l'interdiction à l'article 6, l'évaluation exhaustive des risques à l'article 7 et le détournement à l'article 11. Monsieur le Président, nous sommes au XXIe siècle et les peuples des nations nous rappellent que le TCA a été adopté pour que les États s'engagent à contribuer à la paix, la sécurité, la stabilité internationale et régionale et au respect des droits de l'homme comme inscrit dans le préambule. L'universalisation du TCA ne pourra se faire sans reconnaître et appliquer ces valeurs universelles. Il n'y a là rien d'irréaliste. Nous comptons sur vous pour en faire avancer la concrétisation pendant cette 7e conférence des États partis. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Issa. Thank you. The turnout, we have a final speaker on the list. Poland, kindly take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I didn't take the floor yesterday, but I would like to underline that Poland welcomes the statement of the presidency and fully support initiatives aimed at strengthening efforts to eradicate the illicit trade and in small arms and light weapons. Regarding universalizations, we are in the position that ATT's universalization requires multi-dimensional approach. These efforts should take into account the specificities of the individual regions and countries, as there is no single strategy that could be effectively applied to all countries being so far outside the treaty. Special attention should be given to states that are signatories of the ATT to encourage them to accelerate their work related to the ratification of the treaty. Priority should also be given to countries that are relevant manufacturers, exporters, and importers of military goods. We welcome the initiative of translating the ATT universalization toolkit and the welcome pack, which was founded by the Republic of Korea. Thank you very much.
I thank you very much, Poland. Thank you. That closes the list of speakers that will take the floor. Thank you all speakers. Thank you very much. In the absence of any other speaker from the floor, let me express my deepest thanks, profound thanks to my co-chair, Ambassador Villegas, for the very hard work and cooperation throughout this process. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I hope we'll continue this beyond our presidency, and there's a lot of work to do, and your experience and expertise and network will be extremely helpful to the next president as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all for being with us through this item. We will have to proceed to item number 6, with which we will have started this meeting today. So agenda item 6, which is treaty implementation. Article 17.4b provides that the Conference of States Parties shall consider and adopt recommendations regarding the implementation and operation of delegations will be reminded that treaty implementation is a national responsibility to be carried out by each state party in its own area of jurisdiction within the context of the principles and obligations set out in the treaty. The Third Conference of States Parties established a working group on effective treaty implementation as a platform for sharing experiences, challenges, and practices on the implementation of the treaty at a national level. At this stage, I welcome most heartily the chair of the working group on effective treaty implementation, Ambassador Sam Boen-Lin of the Republic of Korea, to take the floor now and to present the report on the work conducted by his working group in the intersectional period. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like to start by thanking the President, Ambassador Gabriel, for the opening remarks and for entrusting me with the responsibility to steer the work of this working group on effective treaty implementation. I would also like to express my deep thanks to the 3 facilitators on Article 6 and 7, 9 and 11. They conducted, as we know, the sessions in unusual and challenging circumstances because of the COVID-19, and I commend their efforts. I also would like to express my thanks to the participants for their active engagement in the April meeting and consultations of the working group on effective treaty implementation. In terms of the general achievement of the working group this year, in March, state parties were able to agree on and welcome the multi-year work plans for each of the sub-working groups. This will help set the course for the work ahead and paves the way for us to achieve our shared objectives in the context of each sub-working group. I'm going to give a very brief recap of what took place during the meeting of each of the sub-working groups, as well as the next steps for each facilitator. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 6 and 7, facilitated by Ambassador Sanchez of Spain, the facilitator provided a brief presentations of the findings of his report on the methodology exercise for the exchange of national practices and interpretation of some key concepts in Article 6 and 7 in compliance with the mandate of the Conference of State Parties. The report confirms that the conceptual underpinnings of national practices analyzed were generally similar, except for national nuances and variations. The facilitator emphasized that the aim of the exercise was to promote exchange of national practices and was not to prescribe or agree on a single interpretation of key concepts, nor to create new norms and standards. During the open debate, delegations considered positively the outcome of the exercise, especially the fact that it does not establish new obligations or prescriptions. The views exchanged during the debate will help inform the next steps taken by the facilitator as he begins his work on a list of possible draft elements for Chapter 1, key concepts of the proposed voluntary guide to assist state parties in implementing Article 6 and 7. He will present this draft at the first meeting of the sub-working group in the CSP7 cycle. Thereafter, the sub-working group will commence focused discussions on Article 6 obligations as contemplated in the multi-year plan. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 9, facilitated by Mr. Rob Wensley of South Africa, the second meeting of this relatively new sub-working group began the substantive work of the group and focused on two preliminary topics: a discussion on national approaches to the terms transit and transitionment, and a discussion on the phrases under its jurisdiction and through its territory in accordance with international law. During the meeting, participants received expert presentations on both topics. In the discussions that followed, the facilitator emphasized the importance of sharing information on national practices in order that state parties may draw on what they perceive to be common practices. He also emphasized that his focus for the sub-working group is to see where the group can reach common understandings on the terms contained in Article 9. He raised the possibility of exploring the development of a compendium of national practice and or voluntary guide in the context of the Ugeti sub-working group on Article 9 to support implementation of this article, whilst noting that this may be an easier task in the context of the second topic compared to the first one. Moving forward, the facilitator will begin preparations for a more in-depth look at measures to regulate the transit and transitionment of arms by land, which will be the focus of the next meeting of the sub-working group in the CSP7 cycle. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 11, facilitated by Ms. Stella Petrovic of Serbia, the meeting began with an overview by the facilitator of a whole draft paper outlining elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion based on discussion that took place during the meeting of sub-working group in February 2020. Following a discussion of the facilitator's paper, participants continued to explore the practicalities associated with assessing the risk of diversion of an export and the possible establishment of mitigation measures. Participants were invited to examine a series of questions aimed at exploring state practice with respect to assessing the risk of diversion and information exchange mechanisms. Finally, they welcomed the newly created Divergent Information Exchange Forum and noted the need for meaningful engagement in this forum. Following the sub-working group's discussions in April, the facilitator prepared and circulated to ATT stakeholders a draft paper outlining the elements of process for assessing the risk of diversion for consultation remotely during the international period. The draft paper incorporating input received during the remote consultation is being presented to CSP7 for consideration and endorsement and forms Annex A to my draft report to CSP7. My recommendation is that the draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion prepared by the facilitator of the sub-working group on Article 11 be endorsed by CSP7 as a living document of a voluntary nature to be reviewed and updated regularly by the working group as appropriate. With that, I thank you all once again for your contributions and suggestions to our discussions. And I look forward to further progress being made on this important issue of treaty implementation in the next CSP cycle. Thank you for your attention and thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much, Excellency. I thank the Republic of Korea, as assisted by Spain, South Africa, and Serbia for the very good work in this working group. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, at this stage, I would like to invite Ambassador Villegas again to take the floor this time to make a brief introduction of the recommendations of the working paper submitted by Argentina. After that, the floor will be open to speakers. We have a long list of speakers who will respond to the presentation on the working group, as well as on Ambassador Villegas' paper. Thank you very much and welcome to the podium, Ambassador Villegas. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, again, and thank you to my distinguished colleague for his report. I'm glad to see you all in this last session about the working paper presented by Argentina as president of the CSP6 in 2020, titled Transparency and Exchange of Information, its role in the prevention of diversion. As you all know, this working paper was presented for the first time on April 2020, but it was not adopted due to also the special circumstances of our CSP6, that, as you know, a set of decisions because of the silent procedure were not adopted, but others were adopted, like the diversion forum. In this case, this paper, there were, in the silent procedure, there were two state parties that broke the silence procedure, and therefore the CSP7 president on November 2020 circulated an announcement regarding the approach to resolve this paper, this draft decision, adopting this paper that were not approved. In the case of this decision 17, regarding the working paper of the presidency of CSP6, we agreed on continuing with the consultation process in order to achieve consensus on this draft. This process included bilateral consultations with those delegations that broke the silence at that time on decision 17. We made presentations of this working paper at the various CSP7 preparatory meetings and garnered the necessary support for its adoption. Since then, Argentina called several informal meetings with all the interested parties, and as a consequence, this draft was amended many times, taking into consideration the comments of all the delegations and stakeholders. On July 6, we circulated through the Secretariat a final version, Rev 4, of this working paper. This is a version that takes into consideration the comments we received during our formal consultations in April during the CSP7 preparatory meetings, and also during our 2 informal rounds of consultations at the end of June during the intersessional period with all the ATT stakeholders. As you all know, this working paper contains 8 recommendations to the CSP promoting transparency and exchange of information measures in order to prevent diversion. The aim of my delegation, after submitting this document for the first time 16 months ago, and after the several rounds of consultations, is to obtain the necessary consensus for the adoption of this document by the CSP7, as it is indicated in the CSP7 agenda. Therefore, this, if you allow me, Mr. President, is the purpose of my presentation. And since one of the decisions that was adopted in the last conference is related to the diversion forum, it's important, we think, that we settle this exchange transparency paper of the presidency of last year, because it will be important to give us a framework for the work of our ATT in the near future. Thank you very much. And I don't know, I'm in your hands if we open the floor for comments on this specific proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. We do have a list of speakers already, and we would like to close the speaker, and speakers will indicate what the, somebody wants to say something? So we will open the floor to delegates, and based upon the list that we already have, and each speaker taking the floor will indicate what their comments will be directed. So you've listened to two very important presentations, the one from the working group from the Ambassador of Korea, and now on the paper, which has been a pending paper since the last conference, and which contains important points from Ambassador Villegas. Ladies and gentlemen, now I'll begin. I have this list. I'll call out for a start five names in that order. In Canada, Switzerland, European Union, France, Republic of Korea. Canada, you have the floor. And kindly indicate what the direction of the conversation is and your presentation. Thank you.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Tout d'abord, notre délégation tient à vous féliciter pour votre nomination à la présidence de la 7e conférence des États parties. Soyez assurés de notre plein soutien tout au long de cette réunion. Nous tenons également à remercier la présidence de la 6e conférence des États parties ainsi que la présidence du groupe de travail sur la mise en œuvre effective du traité pour ces présentations fort utiles. Premièrement, Comme les États sont invités à échanger des vues sur la mise en œuvre du traité sur le commerce des armes, nous souhaiterions souligner certains des efforts continus du Canada dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre du traité. Suite à notre adhésion au traité en 2019, et en plus de la soumission de notre rapport initial et de notre premier rapport annuel, conformément à l'article 13, le Canada a également publié son rapport national annuel intitulé « Rapport sur les exportations de matériel militaire du Canada ». Le dépôt de ce rapport devant notre Parlement, au plus tard le 31 mai de chaque année, est une obligation juridique. Nous souhaitons souligner le fait que durant l'année 2020, le Canada a refusé 5 demandes de permis d'exportation à la suite d'une évaluation de risque substantiel, qui est l'équivalent canadien de risque prépondérant. Les exportations proposées ont été refusées car notre ministre des Affaires étrangères a jugé qu'il existait un risque important que ces exportations entraînent une ou plusieurs des conséquences négatives décrites aux articles 7.1 et 7.4 du traité, et que ce risque n'a pas pu être suffisamment mitigé. Plus particulièrement, ces refus ont été formulés au motif d'un risque important de violation grave du droit international humanitaire, de violation grave du droit international des droits de l'homme ou d'actes graves de violence fondés sur le sexe. De plus amples renseignements sont disponibles sur le site web du ministère des Affaires étrangères du Canada, Affaires mondiales Canada. Nous souhaiterions attirer l'attention des délégués sur la fonction de clavardage de la plateforme en ligne de la conférence, où nous avons publié le lien vers ce rapport. Monsieur le Président, en plus des mesures en place visant à mettre en œuvre le traité à l'échelle nationale, le Canada continue d'appuyer les initiatives dont l'objectif est de renforcer la mise en œuvre générale du traité. Par exemple, le Canada s'est récemment associé à l'Institut des Nations Unies pour la recherche sur le désarmement, en anglais UNIDEAR, auquel il a accordé une subvention de 300 000 $ canadiens afin d'appuyer le programme Genre et désarmement de UNIDEAR au cours des 3 prochaines années. Les résultats attendus de ce partenariat sont notamment l'amélioration des pratiques actuelles en matière d'analyse relative au sexe et d'utilisation de données ventilées par sexe dans les processus de contrôle des armes classiques et du désarmement, et la constitution d'un groupe plus diversifié d'acteurs appuyant l'intégration des considérations portant sur l'égalité des sexes dans les politiques et pratiques de contrôle des armes et de désarmement, y compris dans la gestion des armes et des munitions. Je continuerai maintenant cette déclaration en anglais. Mr. President, we would like to provide an update on the working paper we are preparing on post-delivery verification measures, which we noted at the working groups meetings this past spring. This working paper will aim to gather different perspectives in the Arms Trade Treaty context. The paper is intended to be neutral in presenting its findings in order to stimulate discussion rather than champion a particular view. We thank the Secretariat, which has kindly circulated Canada's questionnaire on post-delivery verification measures in May, to allow us to compile the different views from states, parties, and other stakeholders into the working paper. We recognize that the consultation timeframe was short, particularly in the context of COVID-19. We are nonetheless pleased to report that a number of states, parties, and civil society organizations already responded, and we wish to thank them for their contribution. In order to produce a better and more representative document, at this stage, we believe that it still behooves us to seek broader input. Accordingly, we invite all states parties and other stakeholders that have not yet had the opportunity to do so to complete and return the questionnaire or to reach out to us to obtain a copy of the questionnaire. Our intent will be to present the working paper at a future Arms Trade Treaty meeting with a view to encouraging further dialogue on this topic. I thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much, Canada. Thank you. Next on my list, Switzerland.
Mr. President, Mr. Chair, let me start with some comments to the Chair's report of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation. First of all, I would like to express Switzerland's gratitude for your much appreciated work in light of the unfavorable circumstances related to the COVID-19 pandemic. It allowed us to make good progress in the working group. The helpful presentations and the distributed documents also supported this progress. With regard to the subgroup on Articles 6 and 7, Switzerland welcomed the exchange of information on the concepts of serious violations of international humanitarian law and serious violations of international human rights law. A common understanding of these provisions is crucial for a correct and uniform implementation of the ATT. At the same time, it is important to continue to ensure that our work does not lead to a reinterpretation of existing international definitions, for instance, those regarding international crimes. With that in mind, Switzerland supports the further development of voluntary guide also with regard to the concepts of serious violations of international humanitarian law and serious violations of international human rights law. Having said this, the voluntary guide could refer to other instruments that already define this concept. Regarding the implementation of Article 9, we appreciate having had the opportunity to discuss the terms transit and transshipment on the one hand, under its jurisdiction and through its territory on the other hand. In addition, the expert presentations on the interpretation of these terms under international law were very helpful. We welcome that the facilitator of the sub-working group will begin preparations for a more in-depth look at the measures to regulate the transit and transshipment of arms by land. Furthermore, Switzerland supports the draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion put forward by the facilitator of the sub-working group of Article 11. It is useful to have such a document available because it contains the most important elements for a careful and thorough examination of export applications in order to minimize the risk of an unauthorized arms transfer. Therefore, we welcome its posting on the ATT website, and we are looking forward to continue this fruitful work next year when we tackle the next topics within the multi-year work plan. Switzerland will take a special interest in the discussion of the transfer chain stage 3 about post-delivery cooperation. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, let me now continue with some comments to the working paper presented by Argentina. We thank Argentina for reintroducing this paper on the role of transparency and information exchange for the prevention of diversion. Transparency and information exchange are key to prevent diversion of arms. This can only be achieved with a close cooperation amongst the ATT stakeholders. At this current time, state parties are working to create the instruments necessary to make an efficient cooperation amongst ATT stakeholders possible. The Diversion Information Exchange Forum is one of those instruments. The list of national point of contacts is another means for that purpose. Lastly, different forms of post-delivery cooperation can become vital tools to preventing diversion. We therefore support the paper's encouragement that are recommended for approval by the CSP. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, and Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Switzerland. Thank you. Next on my list, European Union.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries of the Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Albania, the country of the Stabilization and Association Process and potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the EFTA countries Iceland, Norway, members of the European Economic Area, as well as Georgia, align themselves with this statement. The EU underlines the essential contribution that the responsible arms trade policy makes to the maintenance of international peace and security and respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. Since the adoption of the EU common position on arms exports in 2008, EU member states are legally bound to assess license applications for the export of conventional arms against 8 criteria. These criteria are in line with the Arms Trade Treaty. EU member states deny licenses whenever there's a clear risk that the export of military technology and equipment might be used for internal repression, contribute to regional instability, or violate international human rights or humanitarian law. The ATT is the first arms regulation treaty to recognize the link between conventional arms transfers and gender-based violence, mandating that gender-based violence be considered in the course of export risk assessments. Its effective implementation can contribute to eliminating violence against women and girls, as set out in Sustainable Development Goal Target 5.2. Following the review of the EU common position on arms exports 2 years ago, the EU and its member states are currently implementing several concrete follow-up initiatives. A searchable online database is now available on the website of the European External Action Service that allows all stakeholders to consult and analyze the data on member states' arms exports in a user-friendly manner. The EU now also has a uniform approach to the export of small arms and light weapons and their ammunition. This approach was formalized by a decision of earlier this year, establishing a set of common features to which end user certificates for the export of small arms and light weapons must conform. The aim of this decision is to prevent the diversion of arms to illicit or unintended users, to create a level playing field, and to increase clarity for the defense industry and its clients regarding relevant requirements. Finally, the EU is working on a database for licensing officers from member states that will contain relevant information on destination countries to be used in the licensing decision-making process. The EU common military list, based on the control list of the Wassenaar arrangement and usually updated on an annual basis, is an important tool to clarify and decide whether a license obligation exists for a specific equipment or technology. The EU common military list can be considered a specification of the scope of the treaty as defined in Articles 2, 3, and 4 of the ATT. In that sense, it can serve as a relevant practical reference tool for states outside the EU as well. Finally, implementation is a national responsibility. Therefore, any assistance that can be provided to states in this regard is both valuable and useful. In this context, the EU will continue its ambitious implementation project on the promotion of effective arms export controls implemented by BAFA and Expertise France. This project has been instrumental in advancing the implementation of the ATT outside the European Union, in particular in the establishment of national control systems and national control lists, drafting and reviewing of the legislative and regulatory framework, prevention of diversion, and in the reinforcement of customs and law enforcement. In the future, this project will particularly focus on assisting non-states parties and signatories to prepare for accession to the treaty. Thank you, Mr. President, and apologies for being long, but I do have the opportunity to speak on behalf of 27 states, so I hope that takes away a bit of the blame. Thanks.
It certainly does. I must add those going forward for the next speakers that we are not doing very well with time, and we don't want to have a backlog of items that we would not be able to exhaust through the week. So kindly let's make the greatest possible effort to speak within 2 minutes. I have France next on my list.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Et la France se joint à la déclaration qui a été prononcée à l'instant par l'Union européenne et souhaiterait, à titre national, formuler les éléments suivants. Nous souhaitons tout d'abord remercier l'ambassadeur de Corée du Sud, M. Lim, pour sa direction responsable à la tête de ce groupe et son rapport très complet qu'il a présenté de manière claire. Et nous souhaitons également remercier les facilitateurs des sous-groupes de travail pour leurs efforts, en particulier durant le cycle intersessionnel. La France souhaite exprimer sa gratitude en particulier envers l'ambassadeur d'Espagne, M. Sánchez de Lerin, facilitateur du sous-groupe articles 6 et 7, pour son implication dans les travaux conduits sous son égide. Et nous souhaitons rappeler notre soutien à l'objectif de dresser un panorama des pratiques nationales et identifier des options possibles pour approcher les concepts clés identifiés. Nous comprenons toutefois de la présentation du rapport du groupe sur la mise en œuvre effective du traité, qu'en cohérence avec la lettre et l'esprit du traité, que l'objectif n'est pas de chercher à imposer une interprétation unique de ces concepts, et nous comprenons par conséquent que l'opportunité de rédiger un guide sur la mise en œuvre des articles 6 et 7 ne pourrait se faire que sur la base du volontariat. La France peut soutenir les recommandations du groupe sur la mise en œuvre, notamment s'agissant de l'endossement de l'annexe A, relative aux éléments à prendre en considération pour évaluer le risque de détournement. Il s'agit de notre compréhension qu'il s'agit de recommandations sans caractère obligatoire que les États parties peuvent adopter conformément à leur législation nationale. C'est un point clé. Ces recommandations n'ont donc pas vocation à se substituer à un cadre national déjà défini, conformément à l'esprit du traité. C'est le cas, par exemple, du paragraphe 4 de l'annexe 4. Nous rappelons que maintenir une base de données avec les noms des personnes autorisées à signer des autorisations ne peut se faire que conformément au droit national. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, et je souhaiterais à nouveau exprimer la gratitude de la France à l'égard du rapporteur et des facilitateurs. Merci.
Thank you very much, and that was superb, France. Thank you. Republic of Korea, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea recognizes the achievements of the work undertaken by the sub-working groups through the virtual meetings in April and informal consultations in June this year. We'll look forward to a list of possible draft elements for Chapter 1 key concepts of the voluntary guide to assist state parties in implementing Articles 6 and 7, which the facilitator, the Ambassador of Spain, will present next year on the basis of the results of the methodology template exercise. In addition, the Republic of Korea supports the voluntary paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion. As we consider this document to be another helpful reference for state parties in implementing the ATT, we hope the other state parties will support it as well. In particular, as the authentication of export documents is crucial to the prevention of diversion, the Republic of Korea hopes that we can further our discussions in the next working group meetings on the exchange of information related to end user certificates, such as their templates, track recording, and the issuing authorities on the ATT platform. Lastly, the Republic of Korea once again welcomes the establishment of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum, a significant achievement of the CSP7. We are very grateful for Argentina's continuous efforts to promote transparency and exchange of information and support the recommendations in the working paper presented by Argentina. I thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much, Republic of Korea. Next on my list is Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, Belgium wants to commend the chair of the working group and the Article 11 subgroup facilitator on preparing a comprehensive draft paper on the diversion risk assessment process. As we indicated in our written submission during the remote consultations, we are generally satisfied with the structure of the document and the pertinent to the point elements that are included. Furthermore, we are pleased to see that most of the comments and suggestions that we submitted are reflected in the present document. As the current chair of the ATT Diversion Information Exchange Forum, we also appreciate reference to the forum and to the potential use of the information shared in the forum as a source for states' own diversion risk assessments. It's important that sharing operational information about diversion in the forum and using that information in line with the terms of reference becomes part of states, parties, and signatories' standard procedures. Even though in April we indicated that the conference should rather welcome the draft paper than formally adopt it, as was done with the other guidance document at CSP4, there are possible measures to prevent and address diversion and the list of possible reference documents to be considered by states parties to prevent and address diversion. We are ready now to accept its endorsement as a living document of a voluntary nature if other states parties agree with this. More generally, nonetheless, we need to be attentive that we create a coherent body of guidance documents and that we streamline our approach to such documents. One final comment on the draft paper concerns a very small typing error that we identified, and that is in the last section of the introduction where there is a superfluous S at the end of a living documents. So the S should go. Mr. President, it wasn't part of our prepared statement, but as the DEEF chair, I do want to reiterate once again our support also to the Argentinian working paper. We appreciate very much the acknowledgement by Argentina of the important role that the forum could play in preventing and addressing cases of diversion. We therefore support not only support the working paper, we are very grateful also for the role that Argentina played in the establishment of the DEEF last year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Belgium. Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, let me just confirm that the list of the speakers list is now closed. It will end with Bulgaria. The next speaker on my list is Mexico. Mexico, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. En nombre de la Delegación de México, deseo agradecer a usted y a los facilitadores del grupo por el informe que nos han presentado y por alentar a todas las...
We are not hearing you in Mexico. I think you need to get the audio on.
Can you hear me, Mr. President? Can you hear me, Mr. President?
I'm afraid Mexico, your audio is off, and you know it happens a lot of times, and you just need to touch a little button in some place.
Can you hear me, Mr. President? Can you hear me?
Since we can't connect with Mexico, I will have to move on. We'll come back to you, Mexico, once the small technical glitch is taken care of. Finland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by thanking you, President, for all the work you have done in preparation of this conference in difficult circumstances. And we are very happy to meet now in hybrid form. I wish to align myself to the statement of European Union and add some remarks on my national capacity. Illicit flows of arms and conventional weapons is one of the great challenges that we face today. Civilians, including women and children, are increasingly targeted. Finland attaches great importance to the humanitarian dimension of the Arms Trade Treaty. However, the consequences of uncontrolled flows on conventional arms go far beyond the immediate human impact of violence. It also seriously hampers any attempts for economic and social development and growth. We welcome Presidency or thematic focus on illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and their effective stockpile management. The topic is closely linked to the key objectives of the ATT, especially to Article 11, where all state parties commit to take measures to prevent diversion. The effective stockpile management is vital when combating illicit transfer of small arms and light weapons. We need to explore further synergies between the ATT and other institutions, programs, and financial instruments. We hope that this CSP7 gives clear guidance to further discussions on this issue. Let me highlight briefly the priorities of Finland shortly. Actually, Finland adopted in March this year government strategy on Africa that specifies our bilateral and multilateral objectives and points out the need to support all efforts to combat the proliferation of small arms and conventional weapons in Africa. During the Finnish ATT presidency in 2016 and 17, we organized a thematic discussion on arms trade and development that highlighted many links between the treaty and the 2030 Agenda for Development, especially Goal 16.4 on illicit transfer. The outcome of that thematic discussion that took place in CSP3 is still very relevant. Just a few more points. Firstly, transparency and reporting is a vital part of ATT implementation. And I take it up because I do not speak anymore when reporting is on the agenda. And key to confidence building. We regret that some participant states have failed to report. I would like to use this opportunity to inform you that Finland included in 2020 ATT annual report a voluntary annex on export data covering all categories of the EU military list. This annex is comprehensive and based on real export data. Second, the ATT is the first arms regulation treaty that recognizes the links between transfer of arms and gender-based violence. We emphasize the importance of mainstreaming gender into practical and technical small arms control activities and programs. In conclusion, let me express my support to the recommendations of the working group on effective treaty implementation. Thank you, Chair.
I thank you very much, Finland, and I thank you for the announcement of support to Africa on small arms and light weapons. I'll yield the floor again to Mexico, and I'm hoping that the small glitch has been fixed. Mexico, you have a chance now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have been reported by some delegations that they can hear me. I just want to confirm that you hear me well, Ambassador?
Absolutely, they are loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for the flexibility to give me the floor again. En nombre de la Delegación de México, agradezco a usted y a los facilitadores del grupo por el informe que nos han presentado y por alentar a todas las partes a seguir implementando cada una de las disposiciones del tratado, y en especial aquellas que guardan una estrecha relación con el tema central de esta conferencia, referente a fortalecer los esfuerzos para erradicar el comercio ilícito de armas pequeñas y ligeras y garantizar la gestión eficiente de existencias. Comparto brevemente que en el último ciclo, México ha instrumentado acciones a nivel nacional, bilateral y birregional para seguir avanzando la puesta en práctica del régimen del tratado. Para estos trabajos, la coordinación interinstitucional sigue siendo clave, por lo que México ha mantenido, a pesar de la pandemia, el trabajo de un grupo de coordinación nacional que conocemos como GC Armas. Con el propósito de ampliar la aplicación de lo dispuesto en el artículo 12 del tratado, se desarrolla un registro criminal de armas de fuego por la Fiscalía General de la República, con el fin de conocer la historia completa, la historia de vida de un arma de fuego, desde su producción, comercialización, venta y uso, hasta su aseguramiento, disposición final o destrucción. Para este registro, se considera un modelo del mercado de armas, para identificar así los diferentes momentos y componentes de las interacciones que ocurren en el mercado lícito e ilícito de armas, y por lo tanto, identificar mejor los espacios que han permitido desvíos de armas y su vinculación con otras actividades delictivas. En otro ámbito concreto de instrumentación del tratado, destaco que México ha confirmado compromisos de verificación postventa, innovando incluso con un socio comercial un esquema de verificación integral a distancia, que da completa certeza a pesar de las dificultades logísticas y operativas que para todo el mundo ha traído consigo la pandemia por COVID-19. Vinculado con esto y en relación a la aplicación del artículo 15 del tratado, México reafirma que la cooperación internacional y la transparencia fomentan la confianza entre los estados, por lo que consideramos que este artículo debe seguir sirviendo como punto de partida para el mayor y mejor intercambio de información tras la realización de transferencias lícitas de armas. Estos compromisos derivados del tratado confirman también la relevancia de las sinergias con otros organismos y foros internacionales. Mi delegación desea aprovechar el espacio para agradecer a Argentina por el documento de trabajo presentado sobre el papel de la transparencia y el intercambio de información en la prevención de desvíos y respalda las recomendaciones incluidas en dicho documento. Finalmente, y reconociendo que la implementación del tratado puede fortalecerse gracias al apoyo de distintos actores como las organizaciones internacionales, las organizaciones de la sociedad civil y la voz experta de la academia, mi delegación desea reconocer las contribuciones que en el ámbito de la cooperación internacional pueden obtenerse desde estos sectores y desde iniciativas concretas como el programa de la Unión Europea sobre control de exportaciones para armas, EU P2P Export Control Program, que tiene como propósito acompañar a los estados en una mejor implementación del tratado y en el que México se congratula en participar actualmente. Muchas gracias, señor presidente, por la oportunidad nuevamente.
Thank you, Mexico. United Kingdom, you have the floor, please.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. The UK would like to thank Argentina for their work in considering the importance of transparency and the exchange of information in preventing diversion. We've been pleased to work on the paper with partners and consider that we now have a set of robust, practical, and implementable recommendations which will guide our future efforts. We consider that the Diversion Information Exchange Forum is an important step in enabling the frank and transparent exchange of information and views in a confidential setting. Given the sensitivity of discussions, we support the proposal that the first session of the forum be put on hold until conditions allow for an in-person meeting. Finally, we welcome the discussions that we've had in the working group on effective treaty implementation, which have involved a wide range of views. We support the proposal for the CSP to endorse the draft paper outlining elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion. We consider that the voluntary nature of the document strikes the right balance between providing helpful and useful information while avoiding the creation of additional and over-prescriptive burdens for member states. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Ireland is next on my list. Ireland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ireland aligns itself with the statements delivered by the European Union and would like to add the following remarks in a national capacity. At the outset, I would like to thank the chair of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation and the facilitators of its sub-working groups on Articles 6 and 7, Article 9 and Article 11. We'd like to register our appreciation for the professionalism and extensive preparations that you've put into the working group meetings over the last year. Your efforts have enabled us to continue this important work with only minimal disruption. Ireland supports the conclusions and recommendations as contained in the WGETI Chair's draft report to the CSP. The implementation of the ATT is a national responsibility, which is embedded in the framework of national control systems. We strongly support the voluntary paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion as a practical document which can tangibly improve treaty implementation. The paper sets out clearly and concisely the fundamental elements that a national transfer system should have in place. My delegation believes it will prove immensely useful to states seeking to establish or develop upon existing risk assessments. We regret that the first meeting for the Diversion Information Exchange Forum has not taken place yet due to the ongoing public health situation. We look forward to engaging in the forum, which is well placed to become a key mechanism for states to share critical intelligence related to illicit arms and combat weapons diversion. President, all states start from different points when implementing the ATT, with different legal and administrative arrangements and levels of capacity. As such, a one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate. Regular information exchange on policies and best practices is key to ensure effective and harmonious treaty implementation. Over the last year, Ireland has been pleased to speak on several occasions, on several outreach panels and support projects designed to identify gaps and improve policy implementation in the areas of ammunition management, gender, and diversion. Our work has included supporting 2 papers by the Stimson Centre, the first on diversion and the second on gender-based violence risk assessments. Each of these papers provides key background and guidance questionnaire to states. These questionnaires were designed to be accessible to all states parties and to standardize practice when assessing risks in a way that is practical to facilitating effective processing of licensing applications. To conclude, Mr. President, the effective implementation of the ATT is a key step in preventing the illicit and irresponsible transfer of arms, which continue to contribute to conflict, instability, and violence. It promotes accountability and transparency in the international arms trade. Universal application and full implementation of the ATT will enhance international security, reduce violence in both conflict and non-conflict settings, and can bring us closer to achieving the goals of the 2030 Agenda. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I thank you, Ireland. China, you have the floor, please.
主席先生，作为条约正式缔约国，中方高度重视并稳步推进相关履约工作。第一，坚持和完善中国军品出口原则和法律法规，确保符合条约义务。中国将继续严格遵循武器出口3项原则，即有助于接受国正当防卫能力，不损害有关地区和世界的和平、安全与稳定，不干涉接受国内政。继续严格执行中国颁布的枪支管理法、军品出口管理条例及军品出口管理清单等法律法规，对所有军品出口依法实施严格有效管理。2020年10月，中国颁布出口管制法，进一步强化了包括军品在内的出口管理制度。第二，中国严格履行相关国际承诺，包括严格遵守联合国安理会有关武器禁运的决议。第三，中国将继续坚持只与主权国家开展军贸合作，并要求接受国政府提供军品最终用户和最终用途证明，承诺未经中国政府许可不向第三方转让从中国进口的武器，特别是中国不向非国家行为体出售武器。第四， 中方将按照条约规定，按时提交履约初始报告和年度报告。第四，中国将按照条约规定，这一做法超出了条约现有规定，充分体现了中国对武器出口的高度负责任态度。第五，中国愿与条约缔约国开展交流合作，共同致力于维护条约的权威性和有效性。主席先生，中方认为，过境和转运是防止常规武器非法转让和滥用的重要一环，赞成各缔约国加强监管力度，充分发挥各国海关重要作用，并积极开展信息交流与执法合作。中方注意到，一些国家对过境和转运的监管能力仍有待提升，希望有关缔约国在立法、执法等方面做出努力，加强对过境和转运环节的监管，防止武器被非法出口和转让。中方愿分享经验做法，为有需要的国家提供必要协助。转用涉及各进口国控制制度和实践等问题，即使出口国进行严格审查，武器仍存在转用风险，这是各国面临的共同挑战，需要各国加强协调与合作，共同妥善应对。中方主张，出口国应加强评估和审查，防止转用风险；进口国应该履行承诺，加强监管，承担防止非法转用的主体责任。同时，出口国和进口国也要加强信息沟通和交流，合作应对可能的转用风险。中方认为，转用风险评估流程要素工作文件应充分考虑各国不同国情，确保各方在自愿基础上开展工作。谢谢主席先生。
I thank you very much, China. Thank you. Next on my list is Namibia. Excellency, Ambassador Julia Imedi Chanduru, you have the floor, please.
Thank you for the floor, Mr. President. We wish to thank Ambassador Lim of the Republic of Korea as chair of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation, as well as the facilitators of the sub-working groups for the excellent work done and the exchange of information and the identification of treaty implementation priority areas for endorsement by the CSP. Furthermore, we wish to thank Argentina for the draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion and are pleased to welcome the document. On implementation in Namibia, as stated yesterday, Namibia became a state party on the 28th of April 2020. As such, we're still in infancy when it comes to the work of the ATT. Namibia is aware, however, that implementation is the heart of the ATT. It is in this regard that Namibia applied to the ATT Voluntary Trust Fund to help build capacity for the implementation project of the ATT. The project will ensure effective implementation of the ATT in Namibia and the review of the legal framework for regulating arms transfer in Namibia. By engaging the experts of Control Arms and its partners to work alongside the Namibian government and national stakeholders responsible for the implementation of the ATT, Namibia gains expertise and tools to establish and govern a competent national authority that will implement the ATT. Mr. President, the ATT VTF is a very important tool for the implementation of the ATT. It lays the foundation for new state parties to commence the actual work of implementing the spirit and letter of the treaty, as well as domesticating the provisions of the ATT into national laws. Namibia urges the ATT VTF that the ATT VTF is sustained for years to come to ensure that new state parties acquire the necessary expertise in implementing the ATT. In conclusion, Mr. President, allow me to share as well that Namibia is committed to fulfilling its financial obligations to the ATT. I thank you.
I thank you. Nice, great commitment. Thank you very much. We have Piero now on speakers list. Piero, take the floor, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. El Perú hace aprecio del trabajo desplegado por la República de Corea y los facilitadores del Grupo de Trabajo sobre Implementación del Tratado España, Sudáfrica y Serbia. Debido a las restricciones de tiempo, esta tarde mi delegación desea referirse únicamente al documento de trabajo sobre transparencia e intercambio de información presentado por la Argentina en su calidad de presidencia de la sexta conferencia en 2020. Muy brevemente, el Perú desea agradecer el texto revisado y sus recomendaciones. El desvío de armas es ciertamente un tema prioritario de los Estados parte. En la corta vida del tratado ya son 2 presidencias, Japón y la Argentina, que hacen de esta problemática el tema central de las conferencias y que para prevenir y erradicarla se ha creado hasta el momento un subgrupo de trabajo sobre el artículo 11 y además un foro de intercambio de información sobre desvío. Al respecto, mi país ya viene implementando las recomendaciones del documento de trabajo, especialmente en aquella relativa a alentar el intercambio de información a nivel bilateral, subregional y regional. Es así como el Perú cuenta actualmente con mecanismos bilaterales con Bolivia, Colombia, Chile y Ecuador de intercambio de información, buenas prácticas y cooperación fronteriza para combatir el tráfico ilícito y el desvío de armas y municiones. El Perú está convencido de la importancia de intercambiar información en el marco del tratado sobre medidas para prevenir, abordar y mitigar el desvío, y esperamos a futuro contribuir en las deliberaciones al interior del subgrupo de trabajo sobre el artículo 11 y en futuras reuniones del Foro de Intercambio de Información sobre Desvío. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Peru. New Zealand, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. This statement relates to the working group rather than the working paper, although we do also support the latter. Aotearoa New Zealand welcomes the excellent work of the Chair and facilitators on the working group on effective treaty implementation and its sub-working groups. Our treaty sets strong standards. It prohibits certain transfers, provides for export-related assessments, seeks to reduce the security of the risk of transit and transshipment, and prevents diversion. In realising its objectives and in ensuring its ongoing credibility, we must all meet the treaty's standards. In this regard, we welcome the previous President's paper on elements for a process for assessing the risk of diversion. As some of you may know, New Zealand has recently conducted a review of its export control system, reflecting public and political interest in our export assessment process. Recognising that transparency is critical to the success of our treaty, we look forward to sharing the results of that review and the lessons we have learned from it with the ATT community in the near future. For some states, we know that cooperation and assistance will be essential for implementing the ATT effectively. New Zealand has had the privilege of acting as chair of the selection committee for the Voluntary Trust Fund since late 2019. This year, the selection held its annual meeting virtually in May and approved 13 projects from 21 applications, all aimed at improving ATT implementation. In our capacity as VTF chair, we have recently released 3 videos providing guidance on the application process, all of which are available on the VTF website, and we have a further video coming soon. In June, New Zealand made a national contribution of $100,000 to the fund. We thank all of those who have contributed to and applied for VTF support and encourage all ATT stakeholders to explore all possible avenues for promoting and supporting this fund. Finally, New Zealand would like to recognise the tireless role of the non-governmental representatives that continue to play a crucial role in ensuring the success of our treaty. The role of civil society in raising the awareness of the ATT's aims and in supporting its implementation cannot be understated. New Zealand looks forward to continuing to work with all ATT stakeholders and our common pursuit for better prospects for international and regional peace, security and stability, and for the reduction of human suffering through our commitment to a more responsible international trade in conventional arms.
Thank you, New Zealand. I will have to yield the floor to the State of Palestine. They had asked to speak, but we are added on the list only now. The State of Palestine, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, the State of Palestine would like to extend its deep gratitude to you, as well as the chair of CSP6, for leading our efforts in a transparent, constructive, and effective manner, including during the preparatory process for the 7th Conference of States Parties. We also thank the Secretariat, the working group chairs, and the subgroup facilitators for all their efforts in ensuring the success of this dialogue. Under the treaty implementation item, allow me to first express our support for the work of the Standing Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation and our appreciation to His Excellency Ambassador Lim of the Republic of Korea as chair of the group for the period between CSP6 and CSP7. Mr. President, the State of Palestine is neither a manufacturer nor large importer of conventional weapons. And in spite of the difficulties that our people are subjected to as a result of Israel's illegal colonial occupation of our territory, we are determined to implement our obligations and to uphold our responsibilities under the ATT, including reporting and financial obligations. This unwavering commitment is born out of our deep conviction that a rules-based international order led by multilateralism is necessary for ensuring freedom, justice, and peace for all. In this regard, the State of Palestine, along with 20 other state parties, participated actively in the methodology exercise for the exchange of national practices and interpretation of some key concepts in Articles 6 and 7. We look forward to taking part in other similar exercises aimed at promoting the exchange of national practices. In addition, we welcome the endorsement of the draft paper outlining the elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion as a living document of a voluntary nature to be reviewed and updated regularly by the working group as appropriate. Mr. President, in closing, we would like to remind all participants that the State of Palestine is holding a side event at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon, which will inter alia tackle the need for effective implementation and universalization of the ATT in the MENA region. The Zoom link is available on the ATT website, and we look forward to your participation. I thank you.
Thank you, State of Palestine. Next on my list is Japan.
Japan would like to begin by expressing its sincere appreciation to the chair of the working group on effective treaty implementations and all facilitators of the sub-working groups for your leadership. We also appreciate Ambassador Villegas for your dedication and efforts to finalize the working paper on transparency and exchange of the information through extensive informal consultations throughout the CSP7 cycle. Japan is happy with the language on the final version of the working paper by Argentina, and we also support the annex of the chair's draft report on the elements of the process for addressing the risk of diversion as a living document and voluntary nature. Japan recognized the vital importance of the working groups on effective treaty implementation as a forum for discussion to promote and enhance the implementation of the ATT. We welcome the clarification in the chair's draft report on the purpose of the exercise conducted under the sub-working groups on Articles 6 and 7, stating that I quote, it was to promote the exchange of the national practices and was not intended to prescribe, create new norms and standards or establish an agreement on a single interpretation of the key concepts. We also appreciate the opportunities to listen to the views of the legal experts on general interpretations of some of the key concepts in the April meeting. It is important for each state to benefit from their expertise and advice to enhance the implementation of the ATT in accordance with their domestic situation and law systems. Mr. Chair, as previously expressed, Japan believes that we should be cautious of any efforts that could risk establishing new norms and possible implications on the interpretations of the other international legal instruments. When we consider and unpack the key concepts which are not defined in the treaty, it is inevitable to face the issue of interpretations, which will not be something that can be easily agreed on by consensus. And in particular, written interpretation may have the serious legal implications on the other frameworks. With these issues in mind, Japan believes that we should take a cautious approach when we continue discussion next year on a list of the possible draft elements for Chapter 1, key concepts of the proposed voluntary guide for assisting the implementation of Articles 6 and 7, and careful consideration should be given in our future work. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank you, Japan. ICRC, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will deliver abridged remarks pertaining to treaty implementation. The International Committee of the Red Cross expresses its appreciation to the chair of the working group on effective treaty implementation and to the facilitators of its sub-working groups. At the heart of the Arms Trade Treaty are the prohibitions spelled out in its Articles 6 and 7 and the requirement to assess the risk that a proposed export of conventional arms, ammunition, or parts and components could be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law, IHL, or human rights law. An export must not be authorized if there is a clear or overriding risk. The faithful implementation of these provisions is critical to preventing war crimes and other serious violations of international law. Exchanges in the sub-working group on Articles 6 and 7 have been useful in bringing out that key concepts such as that of serious violation of international humanitarian law are well-established notions, and there is widespread agreement on their meaning. In spite of this, whether the ATT's humanitarian purpose of reducing human suffering is realized depends on how states parties give effect to its provisions in practice. Yesterday, the ICRC's vice president spoke of the increasingly protracted nature of contemporary armed conflicts fueled by the inflow of weapons, and of the risk of diffusion of responsibility resulting from the multiplication of actors that support warring parties, including by supplying them with arms. The humanitarian consequences can be devastating. The ICRC calls on states that support warring parties to take practical steps to reduce the human cost of war. States supplying the means by which wars are fought bear a special duty in this regard. Our report, Allies, Partners and Proxies, published in April, proposes guiding questions for decision makers to strengthen their analysis of the humanitarian risks and concrete steps that involved actors should take to mitigate these risks. We are looking forward to exploring some of these aspects in our side event tomorrow. The ICRC remains concerned that all too often there is apparent tension between the legal obligations of states under the ATT and their duty to ensure respect for IHL on the one hand and actual arms transfer practice on the other. The ICRC commends states that have openly shared information on their arms transfer practices. We encourage all stakeholders to utilize forthcoming sub-working group meetings to explore in more depth what practical measures states take to fulfill their obligations relating to transit and transshipment, how they assess and mitigate the risks relating to arms export and diversion, and what challenges they encounter. The ATT can only deliver on its promise if common challenges in implementation are duly recognized and states parties find ways to overcome them. Within the limits of our mandate and expertise, the ICRC stands ready to support these efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
And I thank you very much, ICRC. Next, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. La Liga Internacional de Mujeres por la Paz y la Libertad agradece las numerosas aportaciones realizadas por expertos y estados en el contexto del grupo de trabajo sobre la implementación eficaz del tratado y sus tres subgrupos. Ofrecemos al respecto 3 comentarios. En primer lugar, WILF ha contribuido activamente en el subgrupo de trabajo sobre los artículos 6 y 7 a desentrañar conceptos y metodologías claves. Algunas de las preocupaciones sobre el valor, la duración, los riesgos y la escasa participación en el ejercicio de los conceptos clave que junto con otras delegaciones hemos expresado se reflejan en el proyecto del informe de la presidencia del ATT a la CSP7. El facilitador ha indicado su intención de pasar a la siguiente fase del plan de trabajo. Les invitamos a dirigir la atención al análisis comparativo de las respuestas a la encuesta que WILF preparó en abril de 2021 como recurso potencial para este trabajo. Nos sigue preocupando la limitada participación de Estados parte en este debate. Esperamos una participación más diversa en el próximo ciclo de reuniones. Instamos a los Estados parte a incluir otros asuntos importantes relacionados especialmente con la implementación rigurosa de los artículos 6 y 7 a sus exportaciones. En segundo lugar, la prevención del desvío es un objetivo del TCA. En particular, en Colombia, las armas desviadas e ilícitas siguen causando daños significativos que impactan de manera desproporcionada la vida de mujeres y niñas. Por ello, garantizar complementariedad de resultados y procedimientos con otros instrumentos y foros que abordan las armas desviadas e ilícitas de forma más específica es importante para lograr el impacto previsto. El borrador del anexo A se fortalecería mucho, incluyendo indicadores de riesgo o aportando la experiencia y el aprendizaje de estos foros. En tercer lugar, el trabajo sobre el desvío es bienvenido, pero no debe convertirse en el foco de los esfuerzos de la comunidad del TCA. Reiteramos la solicitud a los Estados parte para que adopten un enfoque más sólido, basado en la realidad y orientado al cumplimiento de la implementación del tratado. Es hora de renunciar a los debates que se producen en el vacío, para que el TCA tenga impacto y mantenga su credibilidad. Dar cuenta de la práctica real y de las preocupantes transferencias de las que el ciclo diario de noticias ofrece amplias pruebas es urgente. WILF ha sugerido ampliamente varios mecanismos que podrían aportar en esta construcción, subgrupos de trabajo adicionales y animar a los Estados parte a plantear sus preocupaciones sobre transferencias específicas y sus impactos en sus declaraciones y presentaciones a la conferencia, como lo ha hecho la sociedad civil durante años. El mecanismo de revisión por parte de la Convención de Naciones Unidas contra la Delincuencia Organizada Transnacional y su protocolo sobre armas de fuego recientemente adoptado puede servir de modelo. Reiteramos que el cumplimiento y la implementación del TCA es una cuestión que afecta a todas las personas y no debe estar condicionada a la voluntad de los estados. Gracias.
I thank you very much, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We have 3 more speakers on the list. You might have noticed that we have gone beyond 4 p.m., but we have some flexibility here. We can go on for another half an hour. I'll call out the remaining speakers, but the admonishment against not going beyond 2 minutes remains, because in the next 25 minutes or so, we'll be going to item number 7, and there will be 2 reports, one on the financial situation by the Secretariat, and we'll have another report on the Management Committee. Conversations about those reports will have to happen tomorrow. Thank you very much. Now, control arms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Control Arms recognizes and appreciates the work done during this difficult year by each of the sub-working groups on implementation. These efforts continue to pave the way towards a strong framework for treaty implementation. Control Arms takes the opportunity to highlight a few concrete examples of the positive impact of ATT implementation, and we hope states will do the same to ensure that the guidance developed by the working groups reflects these important developments. There's a clear need for states parties to share information on how they apply the ATT to individual licensing decisions. The Netherlands, for example, has offered to discuss publicly its own risk assessment process, including the basis for declining certain export licenses. Sharing the steps that states parties take to assess risk provides pathways for others to apply successful strategies and address known challenges. This is what meaningful information sharing looks like. Over several CSP cycles, we urged states to openly discuss problematic arms transfers, most notably in the context of the Yemen war. In early 2021, Italy took the decision to revoke export licenses, which cancelled the shipment of more than 12,700 bombs to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Through this action, as noted by our partner, Yemeni civil society organization Muwatana, Italy stopped providing bombs to countries conducting indiscriminate and disproportionate airstrikes that kill, wound, and grievously harm civilians, and exacerbating an ever-worsening humanitarian crisis. Control Arms sees value in gaining an understanding of how the ATT is being used in licensing decisions. Conducting a national level survey of the number of licenses granted and refused by states parties consistent with the Article 6 and 7 obligations and their related sub-articles would help inform the guidance developed by this working group. We welcome Canada's statement today, which referenced denials made under the treaty, and we hope other states will follow this positive example. We welcome the paper presented by the sub-working group on Article 11 on diversion risk assessment. Beyond the existing good practice identified in this paper, we urge states to address key weaknesses in legal arms trade systems. Recent events in Afghanistan and before that, the collapse of the Gaddafi regime in Libya illustrate too well the negative impact of the diversion of legally transferred arms in these regions. And yet, countries react too often to crisis by supplying more arms into areas already awash with them. Last week, Amnesty International reported that weapons recently exported legally into West Africa are now in the possession of armed groups in the Sahel, including an Islamic State affiliate that has claimed responsibility for hundreds of civilian deaths. Meanwhile, the EU is developing a new mechanism, the European Peace Facility, which will facilitate the transfer of more military equipment into fragile settings. States should reassess whether the answer to an overabundance of weapons, especially in a fragile context, is more weapons. These situations illustrate the urgent need for risk assessments to take a longer view, including risk of future instability or state collapse and its likely consequences. In this regard, we encourage the working groups in Article 6, 7, and 11 to explore how states parties can incorporate such perspectives into their decision-making processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Control Arms. Matt for Peace, Development and Human Rights, you have the floor.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. تكرر ترحيبها مؤسسة ماعد بعقد المؤتمر السابع واسترشادا بمقاصد ومبادئ ميثاق الأمم المتحدة والتأكيد على الحاجة إلى منع الإتجار الغير مشروع بالأسلحة التقليدية والقضاء عليها ومنع تحويلها إلى السوق بطريقة غير مشروعة. ورغم ذلك قامت عدد من الدول بانتهاك أحكامها وتنفيذ عمليات لنقل الأسلحة إلى المناطق المتأثرة بالنزاعات المسلحة حول العالم، والتي تشهد وقوع عدد كبير من جرائم الحرب وانتهاكات للقانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. إلا أنه لا يخفي على أحد حقيقة أن الغالبية العظمى من عمليات نقل السلاح إلى المناطق النزاعات المسلحة قد قامت بها دول أما وقعت أم ولم تصدق على المعاهدة أو لم توقع من الأساس. ويتضح من ذلك من خلال النظر إلى ممارسات الدول التي درجت على توريد الأسلحة لأطراف النزاعات المسلحة في اليمن والتي تعتبر من ضمن أولى مناطق النزاع التي تضررت من الانتشار الغير مشروع للأسلحة الصغيرة والأسلحة الخفيفة. فقد ارتكبت ميليشيا الحوثي عدد كبير من انتهاكات القانون الدولي الإنساني منذ أن بدأ النزاع المسلح في اليمن قبل 7 سنوات حتى اليوم. شملت تلك الانتهاكات عمليات القتل العمد الغير مشروع، إعدامات المدنيين، إثارة الذعر بين المدنيين وترويعهم، الإخفاء القسري، العنف الجنسي، تجنيد الأطفال قسرا، السلب والنهب، إعاقة إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية، وأيضا من أبرز الانتهاكات هي تسهيل دخول مدافع الهون، حيث درج الحوثيين على استخدام هذا النوع من الأسلحة، الأمر الذي وقع معه عدد كبير من الانتهاكات ضد المدنيين والأعيان المدنية. السيد الرئيس، من جراء قصف مناطق تضم مدنيين بالقذائف الهون من قبل الحوثي، أصبحت اليمن ثاني دول العالم من حيث نسبة امتلاك المدنيين للأسلحة بعد الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وفقا لدراسة أجرتها مؤسسة ماعت، حيث يمتلك كل 100 مدني حوالي 53 قطعة سلاح، إجمالي يزيد عن 14.8 مليون قطعة سلاح في حيازة المدنيين، الأمر الذي أدى بدوره إلى تأصيل ثقافة العنف المسلح لدى عدد كبير من أفراد المجتمع، مما يعيق تنفيذ المادة السادسة من المعاهدة. لذلك توصي مؤسسة ماعت بضرورة مراقبة التزويد بالأسلحة الصغيرة والأسلحة الخفيفة بصرامة بالنسبة إلى مناطق النزاعات المسلحة، كما توصي وتحديدا في اليمن، كما توصي بضرورة تقييد تداول الذخائر وحظر نقلها إلى مناطق النزاعات المسلحة، وفرض كل الرقابة الممكنة على مخازن الأسلحة والذخائر في المناطق التي تكون على حافة الوقوع في النزاعات المسلحة، دون الانتقاص من سيادة الدول حتى لا تقع تلك الأسلحة في النهاية في أيدي أولئك الذين قد يستخدموها لانتهاك القانون الدولي الإنساني. كما توصي مؤسسة ماعت اتخاذ خطوات حاسمة نحو الجمع الفعلي للأسلحة والذخائر بعد توقف العمليات العدائية وتدمير ما فاض بها، وذلك لعدم تدويرها من نزاع إلى آخر. وأخيراً توصي مؤسسة ماعت وتقرر تلك التوصية إشراك الشباب من المنطقة العربية والإفريقية في ابتكار مبادرات لتسهيل التخلص من الأسلحة الصغيرة والخفيفة وتثقيفهم بها. شكراً سيادة الرئيس وبعتذر على الإطالة.
Thank you, Matt for Peace and Development and Human Rights. Next on our list is Bulgaria. After that, we'll provide a forum to the State of Israel, who've asked for a right of response to the statement made by Palestine. Bulgaria, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, since this is the first time my delegation is taking the floor, allow me to congratulate you on the assumption of your duties. We thank you for your skillful stewardship so far and wish you further success. The Republic of Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement made on behalf of the EU member states, but allow me, however, to stress on several considerations in our national capacity. This year's topic, as suggested by you, Mr. President, concerns aspects like in the very heart of our treaty. We welcome your choice and we hope that the goal you have set in your paper, namely to engage all states parties of the ATT, will be reached, thus providing for a truly tangible outcome of our deliberations. We share your view that for the ATT to be efficient, it has to provide for a sustained, integrated and collaborative approach towards addressing the problems of the illicit trade in conventional arms, including SELF, by ensuring accountable and transparent arms control systems and enhancing safe and secure accounting, storage and disposal of weapons by states. We also share your understanding that strengthening cooperation for the effective implementation of the ATT means preventing diversion in the post-delivery phase, the latter one being one of the major challenges in the course of the practical implementation of the provisions of the ATT. Stockpile security and management are major element in that process. They can play a crucial role in preventing diversion, but only if respective criteria are followed in the same or in the similar way. One possible way forward towards a harmonized approach could be through the introduction of promotion of risk assessment criteria. Another way could be through sharing of national implementation practices in exchange regarding practical implementation measures. In that regard, Mr. President, we understand the topic suggested by you as a very good start of a more thorough and more comprehensive consideration of the whole topic of diversion. Stockpile management represents the end of the delivery chain when elaborating on the overall process of export control of conventional weapons. Harmonized approaches and common understandings with regard to risk criteria
could and should play a key role when assessing the potential for diversion. The EU Council Common Position 944 from 8 December 2008 provides for a set of comprehensive criteria applied by EU member states when assessing applications for the export of conventional arms. These criteria constitute a set of very practical benchmarks to be taken into account by national export control authorities when assessing arms exports applications. We are of the view that a discussion regarding the criteria applied by ATT states parties when assessing diversion risks and related threats would significantly enrich our deliberations and provide for new incentives for accessions, but also for new approaches when discussing the genuine causes for diversion. Such a discussion could potentially contribute to an early prevention of exports towards countries of final destination where export control criteria are questionable or vague or do not exist at all, including with regard to safety and security of stockpiles. The above-mentioned discussion can contribute further towards the goal of turning the ATT into the key international instrument for the establishment of highest possible common international standards for regulating the international trade in conventional arms, thus preventing and eradicating the illicit trade in those arms and prevent their diversion. The process will significantly help the ATT to start playing its crucial role in complementing the UN Programme of Action on the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and the International Tracing Instrument, and would contribute more broadly to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Strengthening the role played by the ATT continues to be the subject of enhanced and comprehensive dialogue among states on their day-to-day practices and policies, and the involvement of industry and civil society towards more openness, transparency, and understanding regarding what it takes in real terms in order to prevent diversion. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, Bulgaria. The State of Israel, you have the floor, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. I am compelled to take the floor in reply to a statement which mentioned my country today. Israel regrets the exploitation of this distinguished forum by that speaker for political purposes. Clearly, that speaker might not be familiar or does not care for the dominant professional and non-political nature of this forum and this treaty. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much. The State of Israel. Now we've exhausted the list of speakers. We have a few more minutes, and so Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'd like to thank Ambassador Villegas and Ambassador Liu for their presentation, and I thank all delegates, Excellencies, for the responses that we've gotten. They have been very comprehensive and extremely helpful. Thank you all, thank you very much. I will now like to move to agenda item number 7. As I said, we've gotten a few very important reports that we listen to and then reflect on, and hopefully have time to discuss later on. Excellencies, agenda number item 7 concerning matters pertaining to the Secretariat, a structure established to assist state parties in the effective implementation of the treaty. Under this item, we have 2 sub-items to consider. 1, the Secretariat's provisional budget for 2022, and 2, the Management Committee's proposal regarding the reappointment of the independent auditor for the ATT. With respect to sub-item 1, which is the Secretariat's provisional budget for 2022, I would like to invite the head of the Secretariat to provide an overview of the Secretariat provisional budget for 2022. Dumisani, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. I'm taking the floor here just to make it a brief introduction of the budget that the Secretariat has prepared and submitted to state parties for this conference for adoption for the financial year 2022. As expected, we normally prepare this budget according to the prescripts of the treaty itself, as well as the financial rules. And the budget presented to conference, therefore, takes into account the elements that are required by the treaty and the financial rules. So in terms of the elements, as well as in terms of the budget items. However, the point that I wanted to bring to the attention of the conference this afternoon is that, as you'll be aware, the ATT budgets are presented in and adopted in US dollars, but they are used or expensed in CHF, which is the Swiss currency. And the reason behind that is that the Secretariat is based here in Geneva, and our currency of operation is actually the Swiss francs. Our supply chain, as well as procurement processes, are actually predicated on the Swiss franc. However, our budget is adopted in US dollars as prescribed by the financial rules. But as a result of this situation, the budget of the Secretariat or of the ATT is exposed to what I would call a fluctuation of the rate of exchange. What it basically means is that for the year ahead, we require much more US dollars to actually procure the same budget items in Swiss francs. You will be aware that the exchange rate between the dollar, US dollar, and the Swiss franc have been consistent over probably about 5 years. But since last year, the dollar has lost value against the Swiss franc. And the current figures are that the Swiss or the dollar has lost about 10% of its value against the Swiss franc. What that basically means, therefore, is that the budget is to actually take into account the exchange rate that is currently ruling. We have, in this slide, we have tried to reflect to the conference, basically the impact of the exchange rate particularly. If you look at the line that talks about the ATT Secretariat is indicated in red at the top of the table, you would realize that over time, from 2017, we have always had efforts to try to bring down the budget of the ATT Secretariat from 911 to 744, 740, 740, and 738. So in the past 4 to 5 years, the budget has been in some kind of a decline. But for the future year, which is 2022, the budget would have to accommodate the 10% depreciation of the US dollar against the franc. And that is why the budget, therefore, for the future year is going up by about 10%, which is coming to about 812,000. And that is a function, direct function of the exchange rate. Of course, there are other items that have changed a bit, but in the main, the main cause of the budget increase by that percentage is exchange rate. In the next slide, we presented that whilst we were faced with the question of dealing with the new exchange rate, we had to look at the method of applying it on the budget. There were two options that we had. One was to apply 10% across the board, but the other option was to basically apply the 10% not across the board, but actually against certain items and moderate others. And what I basically mean is that for items that are based on contracts that are currently standing, we had to apply the 10%. But on items that are estimate-based, we had therefore to try to moderate those costs to accommodate, to try to minimize the impact of this rate of exchange. The budget as such was presented to committee, the management committee, which exercises oversight over these matters. And the committee itself had to look at two positions. One was to go for a full cost budget or was to go for a reduced budget. And if you were to go for a reduced budget, there are certain risks that are supposed to be escalated to this conference to be considered and accepted by the conference. In this context, therefore, what we decided as a secretariat was to actually present to conference a budget that is realistic, that will be able to support the ATT process and programs, and is going to be able to ensure that our work is not impacted negatively. But a point to underscore here is that the economic situation, if it improves, if the US dollar improves in terms of value against the Swiss franc, if there are savings deriving from that. So those savings will be turned back to states in a format through a rollover process, as you would know. 8.4 of the financial rules provide for a mechanism of rolling money back to states, which has not been used. So that mechanism is going to deal with changes in the real world in financial year 2022. And we also note that we want to highlight that I think the budget at the present moment, given the increase in the number of state parties, the base on which the budget is shared has increased a little bit. And I think that is to the benefit of ensuring that the burden is shared by more states than a less number of states. However, as a final point to make here is that if the conference would be unable to adopt the budget as proposed, we are also indicating areas of the budget that could be considered for reduction. And of course, when we consider those reductions, and I think, of course, then the conference will have to accept the risks that we are escalating to the conference. So in a nutshell, I would want then to submit to Mr. President that the budget is realistic and we call for the adoption of this budget in a format that it has been presented. I noted that Mr. President has just excused himself. But in his absence, in my role as the head of the Secretariat and as the Secretary of Conference, I will therefore step into his shoes for a moment, not to call for something that he wouldn't have called for, but to actually go to the next item under the sub-item, which is actually a proposal by the Management Committee for a reappointment of an independent auditor for the ATT process. To do that, I hand over to the member of the AMC, Mr. Anga September, who represents the AMC over here. Mr. September.
Thank you, Mr. Gladler. Mr. President in absentia, Excellencies, distinguished representatives. As you know, the Management Committee is established as a subsidiary body to provide oversight on financial matters as well as other matters related to the ATT Secretariat with the aim of ensuring maximum accountability, efficiency, and transparency. In short, to ensure good governance. It is therefore a pleasure to, on behalf of the Management Committee, to present the committee's proposal regarding the reappointment of an independent auditor for the ATT. Rule 10 of the ATT financial rules provides that the Conference of State Parties shall appoint for a period of 4 years an internationally recognized independent auditor with experience in the audit of international organizations to audit the ATT Secretariat. The activities of CSP and subsidiary bodies. The independent auditor shall be appointed for a period of 5 years and may be reappointed for 1 additional term, subject to satisfactory performance. In September 2017, CSP3 decided to appoint PricewaterhouseCoopers as the independent auditor for the ATT for a period of 4 years, covering the period 2018 to 2021, in accordance with Rule 10 of the ATT financial rules. The first term of PricewaterhouseCoopers as the auditor for the ATT terminates at the end of December 2021. In view of this conference is expected to decide on the reappointment of the ATT auditor for the next period. After consideration of the good work conducted by PricewaterhouseCoopers in the past 4 years in respect of auditing of ATT financial statements and providing the necessary assurance, the committee proposes that PricewaterhouseCoopers be reappointed as an independent auditor for the ATT for an additional period of 4 years, starting in January 2022. The cost for servicing the PricewaterhouseCoopers contract are included in the 2022 budget estimates for the ATT Secretariat and will be provided for in all future ATT Secretariat budgets. With that, I thank you, distinguished delegates, for your kind attention, and I yield the floor back to the President.
Thank you very much. Let me thank both of you, Secretariat, Head of the Secretariat, and the Management Committee for your reports. Thank you so very much. And as I said, we don't have time to go into an extended discussion of what they was presented. We will be able to do so tomorrow. We are way beyond our time allocation, and I'm sure we are all very exhausted for the day. Before I bring this meeting to a close, I'll yield the floor once again to the Secretariat to make a couple announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just summarize the announcement for this afternoon or for this afternoon. There are 3 site events that will be taking place, or some of them might have started already. The first one is a site event hosted by the State of Palestine. It goes under the title Upholding Legal Obligations under the ATT, the Case of the Palestinian People. That is site event number 1. Site event number 2 is hosted by Safer World with the title See You in Court, Yemen-linked arms export litigation and its implications. The third one is hosted by UNIDE, Stimson Center, and the Conflict Armament Research. It goes under the title Analyzing Diversion Dynamics, Lessons Learned. So delegates are invited to join this conference, and the links to these site events are set out on the ATT website or published over there. But tomorrow morning, we have another site event taking place before the start of the 3rd session of conference. It will start at 11:30 to 12:40. It's a site event that is hosted by the European Union. It goes under the title Taking Stock of the EU ATT Outreach Program. And again, the links of this site event are on the website. The final point, Mr. Chair or Mr. President, is that we encourage delegates to submit statements to us so that the Secretariat, so that we can be able to publish them on the website. So that will facilitate the accessibility to the statements that have been made over here. Mr. President, thank you so much for your attention.
Hello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I will now move on to adjourn this meeting for today. We will resume our work tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. with the consideration of agenda item 8, and we'll have a conversation, if that's possible, on what we've had. Tomorrow, the focus will be begin with transparency and reporting. I thank you all for attending this meeting. I've been approached by a number of people about the list of speakers who didn't have the chance to speak yesterday. We will get to that, I promise. It is just that time hasn't allowed us to do that today, but we will get to that before the conference ends. Thank you all, and I wish you a joyful ride home, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.